On July 3rd, 1971, Jim Morrison died in Paris under what can only be called mysterious circumstances. We don't know what happened to Jim in Paris, and I don't think we're ever going to know what happened to Jim in Paris. And the last time I saw Jim was in the recording studio when we were finishing up the album L.A. Woman. And that's actually the last time Jim Morrison was in a recording studio, the last time he ever sang, to my knowledge, on planet Earth. Certainly the last time he ever sang with the Doors. But the last recording session, the last time Jim Morrison ever sang with the Doors, was that haunted little whisper voice of Riders on the Storm on the L.A. Woman album. And after he did that, he said, I'm going to Paris. I said, whoa. What a good idea, man. I thought it was an excellent idea. He said, you guys, he said, we're close to being finished here. We've got most of the mixes done. We only got a couple more songs to mix. Everything sounds great. Why don't you guys just go ahead and finish up? And that was kind of unusual, too, because Jim would always be around. He wouldn't leave. I mean, you know, he wouldn't be there for all the mixing, but he'd certainly come in to listen to the final mixes, the final takes, and the final mix, and to hear the final album. So for Jim to actually leave before he heard the entire finished album was very unusual, and I should have realized something was up at that time. But he said, go ahead and finish it up. You know, you get 2 or 3 songs. Everything sounds great, man. I'm leaving tomorrow for Paris. Pam's already over there. She's got a little apartment and got it all set up. She left a couple of weeks before me, and I'm going to join her over there in Paris. We said, well, that's interesting. Paris, huh? How long are you going to be over there? He said, you know, I don't know. A couple of months? 6 months? I don't know. Maybe even a year. Who knows, man? I don't know. And I said, you know, that's a good idea, dude, because we had finished our Elektra contract. We had delivered the requisite amount of recordings to Elektra Records. Our contract was concluded, and we were now a free and clear band to re-sign with Elektra if we wanted, to sign with another record company, to do whatever we wanted, or do nothing, you know, to take a long break and just think about man, God, existence, and life. And we had a little bit of money in the bank from the record sales, so we were free to do anything we wanted. So Jim was going to go to Paris. And I said, that's a great idea, actually. Get away from your drinking buddies. Get away from the bad companions and the hangers-on that were always glomming on to Jim and taking him to the bar. And Jim was always paying, and he would wine and dine these sort of ne'er-do-well friends of his, quote-unquote friends. And they were just sucking up his energy and sucking his vital essence and keeping him away from being a poet. He would sit in the bar and talk all his energy away, you know. He wouldn't be home writing. I mean, what he should have been doing was writing instead of talking it out and staggering in way past the midnight hour, far too late. And Pam was always mad at him because he was always running around and getting drunk with his friends. And so Pam and Jim had a stormy relationship, and I think to make things up with her, he was going to go to Paris with her. Why they had picked Paris, I have no idea. They should have gone to London. It would have been a lot better. But they went to Paris for some reason or another. But I thought, that's great. Paris is great because that's the city of light, the city of artists, an American in Paris, Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Henry Miller. And man, that's just get away from all of this LA stuff and this whole rock and roll thing and become a poet again. Become the guy that I knew back in Venice, the guy that I knew in the film school at UCLA, the writer, the artist, the good guy, the good human being, the funny human being, the intelligent, sensitive, energized young man that I knew back in Venice. And I thought, this is going to be great. Go to Paris and do it, man. Start to write again. Start to become an artist. Just be an artist again. Don't be a rock star. Be an artist. And off he went. And he said, I'll see you, brother. And I said, okay, man, you know, just stay in touch and we'll talk to you in a while. he went off to Paris, and, we didn't hear anything from Jim one way or the other for about a month and a half, 2 months. Record had come out. LA Woman was doing great. People say, the Doors are back. The critics of the Doors are back with their intensity and power once again, and critics loved it, and the sales were doing very nicely. And Love Her Madly was a hit single, so he had a hit single on an album that had some great long songs, Riders on the Storm and LA Woman and like that. And Jim called John Densmore and asked John how the record's doing. And John said, oh, man, it's doing great. It's racing up the charts and people love it. And Jim said, oh, it's terrific, man. He said, man, as soon as I get back, we got to go on the road. I want to play those songs live, we never got to play those songs live. John said to him, exactly, man. Boy, I'd love to play LA Woman and Riders on the Storm. We could take a bass player with us. And Jim said, yeah, why don't we take that guy that played with us, that Jerry Sheff guy, man? We'll take him on the road with us. And John said, yeah, that's we'll take him. Maybe we'll take the guitar player. Maybe not. Maybe we'll get some other guitar player. At least take the bass player along. And Morrison said, boy, I can't wait to play those songs. As soon as I get back, man, let's book a little tour. What do you say? And John said, okay, man, when are you coming back? And Jim said, I don't know. I'm having a pretty good time. And, I'll be here for a while yet. And John said, okay, man, well, next time I talk to you, stay cool, man. Enjoy yourself. And that was like in the early June. That was early June. And then by July 3rd, that was it, man. I got a phone call telling me that Jim Morrison is dead. A phone call from this guy that was our manager. And he called and said, I just got a phone call from Paris saying that Jim Morrison is dead. And I said, get out of here. I don't believe it, man. Jim Morrison said, Paul is dead. There was a lot of, everybody's dead at that time. Paul is dead because he was walking across the street on the Beatles album, Abbey Road, and he was walking out of step and he didn't have shoes on. And in Italy, if you don't have shoes on, that means you're a corpse. You had a suit but no shoes. That's how they bury a corpse. And see, he's out of step with the other three guys. That means he's dead. People were starting to get a little death obsessed. Manson had happened, and the whole thing was getting a little weird. Obviously the Kennedys were dead and Martin Luther King was dead, so people were starting to think, my God, Vietnam, the ghosts, this planet was filled with ghosts of dead young soldiers and Vietnamese women and children and Vietnamese soldiers. They were hovering on the planet. So it was starting to get a little spooky on planet Earth. So, I said, I don't believe it, man. It's just death rumors, because Jim, here's a funny story. Jim, we were at a party, and Jim was supposed to be at the party, didn't come, was a little late coming to the party. Somebody runs in and says, Jim Morrison's just been killed in an automobile accident. But, oh my God. 5 minutes later, Jim walks in the door. We said, Jim, man, I thought you were dead. He said, no. Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Always quoting somebody, a Mark Twain quote. And I said, And then there was another time he had fallen out of a window and he was supposed to be dead. So when I heard the story that Jim Morrison was dead, I said, it's ridiculous, man. It's just more of that paranoid death stuff. And this guy said, no, this time I think it's serious. I said, well, I'm certainly not going to Paris to check out some silly rumor, And he said, don't worry, I've got a 12 o'clock flight. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning. So I got the 12 o'clock flight to Paris. I'm going over there. And okay, fine. Well, find out this time, will you, man? And I said to him, just make sure this time, will you? 3-4 days later, I get a phone call. This guy says to me, we just buried Jim Morrison. This was like on a Friday or Saturday. It was Friday, I think. Maybe it was Saturday. I forget, Friday or Saturday. Monday, it was either Monday or Tuesday morning. We just buried Jim Morrison. I said, what? So what are you talking about? I said, yeah. I said, wait a minute. This is like a rumor. This is not a rumor. This is not a silly little paranoid fantasy. You mean he's dead? Yeah. He's dead. We put the coffin in the ground. cemetery is called Père Lachaise Cemetery. It's right in Paris. Beautiful old cemetery. Edith Piaf is there, and Isadora Duncan is there, and Heloise and Abelard, and Céline may be buried there for all I know, and Chopin is there, and Molière is there. So there's a lot of artists there. Beautiful old. I said, I don't care who's there, man. Wait a minute. What happened? This guy's, I don't know. I don't know what happened. Oh, yeah. I mean, was he hit by a truck or something? No. His heart stopped. His heart stopped. What are you talking about? I said, how does he look? How does he look? And this guy said, I don't know. I never saw the body. I said, hold it. What do you mean you didn't see the body? It was a sealed coffin. They buried a sealed coffin. And I said, you mean you didn't say, let me see Jim Morrison. I want to see Jim Morrison dead. You're telling me Jim Morrison is dead. Show me Jim Morrison dead. As a manager of the band, you say, that's our lead singer. That's Jim Morrison. Let me see Jim Morrison dead. Jim Morrison was never seen dead. That coffin was put in the ground, covered over, and that was it. I said, that's it? He said, that's all I know, man. I'm telling you what I know. I was here. He's dead. He's dead. Pam was all broken up. I'm telling you, Pam was just crying and weeping and everything. And, I just couldn't bring myself to open the coffin. I said, oh, God. And we're waiting for Jim to come back. We're working on some songs. John and Robbie and I are getting together, every Tuesday and Thursday, a couple of hours in the afternoon, putting some little ditties together, working on some tunes, a little of this, a little of that, keeping the chops up, writing some songs. I had started writing some stuff. John was working on some songs himself, and we're taking this opportunity to do some woodshedding, as they call it, and work on some tunes and waiting for Jim to come back. And all of a sudden, assuming, of course, that Jim's coming back, all of a sudden Jim Morrison, it's not only is he not coming back, Jim Morrison is dead. Jim Morrison will never be seen again. Your buddy, your pal, your friend, your brother, your soulmate, the guy, Dionysus. I played Apollo to his Dionysus, and Apollo and Dionysus are never going to hug again, are never going to make love again on stage, are never going to make art together. So everybody in the band was completely destroyed, man. And that's the story. So I first met Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison and I actually went to the film school at UCLA. That's where the Doors got started. Doors got started at the UCLA Film School, University of California, Los Angeles. And the time period was 1963, 1964, when we were film students at UCLA. We graduated in the summer of 1965. I got my master's degree, and Jim got a bachelor's degree. Unlike what is portrayed in the heinous film about the Doors, Jim Morrison did not quit UCLA. He did not say, I quit, after they panned his film. And they did pan his film. I mean, Jim's film was not highly received by the collective student body and the faculty at UCLA at the time of the student screenings. But personally, I thought it was brilliant. So Jim's film was basically it was poetry. What's interesting about it, it was a cinematic poetry. It was a juxtaposition of images that really didn't have any relationship to each other necessarily, but after 7 to 8 minutes went by, it became a collective whole and became a poetic piece. And I thought it was quite brilliant. It was nonlinear. It was purely experimental. It had a great shot of Jim doing a great hit toke off of a huge bomber, which for those of you who know, you know what a bomber is: a spliff, a doob, a blunt. Because we were all heads at the time. See, that's the whole point of it. The whole point of the UCLA Film School and the whole point of 1963, 64, 65, 67 in Venice is that we were all heads. Everyone was high. Everyone was giggling and laughing and having just the grandest time. You know, that's what that intoxicant does to you. That the good green herb that grows on God's good green planet is an intoxicant. It's a delightful thing that just takes you into another state of being that puts you into a very silly, funny state. So Jim Morrison's student movie was a very silly, very funny, and very poetic student movie along the lines of Jonas Mekas film culture out of New York City. Now, I myself had made a couple of student movies at UCLA also, starring my girlfriend at the time, Dorothy Fujikawa, who has long since become my wife. And we're still happily married and still together, and it's been a wonderful relationship. But she was the star of my student movies, and they had what was called the Royce Hall screenings at UCLA, and they would select, 12, a dozen to 14 student movies out of the year to show at Royce Hall, the prestigious hall where symphonies were performed, and Odetta would sing, the Modern Jazz Quartet would play, the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra performed there. I walked in on a rehearsal once of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and it was absolutely overwhelming, standing right at the foot of the stage. Zubin Mehta was the conductor, and I'm watching the LA Philharmonic do the Rite of Spring in Royce Hall. Well, lo and behold, a few months later, Ray Manzarek's student film Induction, and the year before that, Evergreen, were shown at the Royce Hall screenings, and that was like a big honor for the best dozen or so student movies. Jim's didn't make it in, unfortunately. He was panned by the students and panned by the teachers, so his movie didn't make it into the screening, nor did it actually make it through the projector. He had trouble with making splices. Jim's forte was not splicing two pieces of film together with a tiny little tape and the tiny little 16 millimeter splicer that you had to use. My two movies, however, Induction and Evergreen, made it into the Royce Hall screening, so they exist. And in my student movies, you can see what UCLA looked like in 1962, 3, 4. The early days, the actual Venice apartment that we lived in. And Induction is about my going into the Army after a tumultuous love affair that ended badly, and my joining the Army. And you can see that movie, Induction and Evergreen, are on the Doors Laserdisc, called the Doors Collection, on, here's the plug, folks, on MCA Universal Home Video. So at UCLA, the actual schooling at UCLA, the film school, was absolutely fabulous. We had some incredibly great professors who, at the time, were trying to get us to be like the French Nouvelle Vague, like Kurosawa in Japan, and Ozu, and Mizoguchi, the Japanese directors, or Satyajit Ray, or Fellini, and Ermanno Olmi, and directors like that. And that's what they wanted us to be. They wanted us to be artists. They were pushing us in the direction of artists. And Colin Young was the head of the department. He brought in visiting Hollywood heavyweights and worldwide heavyweights to come and teach at UCLA. One of the teachers at UCLA was none other than the fabled French director Jean Renoir, the son of Renoir the painter and the great director Jean Renoir himself. And he he brought romance to the school, that great French romanticism. And I never had a class with him. He taught the directing class. I was about to take the directing class, and he had gone. The summer had gone by, and he was only there for 1 year. I had signed up for the directing class in the fall, so they brought in a substitute for Jean Renoir. Changed my whole life, man. Joseph von Sternberg. I actually was taught a directing class by Joseph von Sternberg, who directed all the Marlene Dietrich movies, who directed her in The Blue Angel and The Shanghai Express and Morocco and The Devil is a Woman and Blonde Venus and Scarlet Empress. And von Sternberg changed my life. He changed my outlook on art. He was the one who was able to take that dark, brooding, Germanic romanticism, film noir, and expressionism, and he opened my mind to how to make movies that were deeply passionate and perhaps even slightly kinky. Who knows? I think the Doors music eventually came out to be slightly kinky and slightly Germanic. I mean, the Doors did the Whiskey Bar in Brecht and Weil. So Jim Morrison, the next semester after me, took the same class with Joseph von Sternberg. So here's these two guys who are going to put together the Doors come 2-3 years later, and they are both being affected by Joseph von Sternberg, the director of Marlene Dietrich. And maybe that's why the Doors are what they are today. So Joseph von Sternberg took us into the small 3K7, bungalow 3K7, the screening room, where all the films were shown and all the student films were shown. And he sat us down and said, okay, boys and girls, students, I'm going to show you The Blue Angel. I'm going to show you Morocco. I'm going to show you The Shanghai Express, which was my absolute all-time favorite. Marlene Dietrich and Anna May Wong together in The Shanghai Express were two of the sexiest women I have ever seen in my life. And I thought, I want to be married to both of these women. This is what I want. I want this. I want the blonde Venus, and I want the dragon lady. The two of them were absolutely gorgeous, absolutely sensual, stunning, and just brilliant, brilliant women. And if I may say so, I think Dorothy Fujikawa comes as close to putting those two women together as any woman I've ever met, and perhaps that's why we're still married, and that's why she was the star of my student movies. So von Sternberg took us into the bungalow 3K7, but also Colin Young and the other guys at UCLA, Ed Brokaw and Bill Adams and Hugh Gray, another learned scholarly gentleman, brought in filmmakers from Hollywood and avant-garde filmmakers. We saw at UCLA, we saw Kenneth Anger's film Scorpio Rising. We saw, and this is funny, we saw the Andy Warhol movies. The first movie we saw was called Sleep. And here's a guy sleeping. And so we stood there, we watched the movie for 5 minutes and said, is this it? And somebody said, it goes on for 6 hours. And we said, 6 hours? What did he do? Just film the guy sleeping? And he said, yeah, that's the joke, man. Out we went. We came back, and there was another movie playing. We thought, okay, this is going to be good. This is called Empire. We thought, oh, Empire is going to be great because it's going to be about the Empire State or Manhattan and all the kinky stuff going on in Manhattan. It's a shot out the window of the Empire State Building, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes, and that's all it is. And everyone went, boo, Andy, you big phony, get out of here. But boy, I'll tell you, Andy Warhol could tweak the nose of the establishment, and he was certainly tweaking the nose of fine filmmaking. And And we saw, this is great, we saw the Maysles Brothers film about the Beatles, the very first tour of the Beatles in America. This is the one with Murray the K as the fifth Beatle, and I forget what that documentary is called, but it's an absolutely brilliant handheld 16 millimeter, a guy with an eclair and another guy with a Nagra, and the two of them were just kind of linked together by the cord, and they just went everywhere as this team, and you were there with the Beatles. Interestingly, that movie became Hard Day's Night. So when you see A Hard Day's Night, that is a theatrical recreation of the Maysles Brothers movie that was first shown to us at UCLA. And I swear, man, seeing that movie, Jim Morrison and I looked at that, kind of looked at each other and thought, hey, rock and roll, man. Rock and roll, screaming, people are screaming, and and then Jim is single, he doesn't have a girlfriend or anything, and chicks, man, all the chicks, look at that, the money, fame, power, music, we can make music and have girls screaming for us. So here I am sitting on the beach in Venice. I've got a bachelor's degree from DePaul University in Chicago in economics. I've got a master's degree from UCLA in cinematography. And I don't know what I'm going to do with myself, or I don't know how I'm going to make a nickel to support us. Hopefully I'd be able to make enough money to ask Dorothy to marry me, but I didn't have a nickel to my name, nor any job prospects or anything. And I'm sitting in the sun, just being a bum, smoking a joint, and that good Thai weed that I had left over from Thailand. It was just good stuff. And who comes walking down the beach but James Douglas Morrison? The sun is setting into the Pacific Ocean. Sun is kind of streaming in behind him. The water is glistening. And I see this figure, man, walking along in the shallows, in the shore break, kind of kicking up the water. And as he's kicking up the water, he's making diamonds because of the way the light is hitting the water from behind, the sun coming in low and hard. And these diamonds are coming out of his feet. And I see this guy wearing cutoffs and without a shirt, weighing about, maybe 135 pounds, thin, 6 foot tall, thin rail guy with long hair. And I look and I thought, my God, that is Morrison. So I waved to him. I said, hey, Morrison. And he looks over and he sees me and he waves. He says, hey, Ray. Comes walking over to me. I'm 15, 20 feet onto the sand off from the shore break. And here's Jim Morrison. And I said, Jim, what are you doing here, man? I thought you were going to New York City. And he said, nah, I decided to stay here. I said, well, cool, man. What have you been up to? He said, well, I'm living up on Dennis Jacobs' rooftop, a buddy of ours, living on his rooftop. I thought, well, never mind about that. What are you doing? He said, nothing, man. Oh, what are you doing? I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I said, and he said to me, you been working on anything? I said, well, I've been thinking about some film scripts and whatnot. And I said, how about you? You working on anything? And he said, yeah. I've been writing some songs. And I said, whoa, writing some songs, huh? Because I knew he was a poet. He knew I was a musician. And I said, you know what? Sing me a song, man. Let me hear what you've been writing. Because we were both fully into the grips of, LSD, marijuana. We were into, we'd smoked a little grass and took a little acid. Our consciousness was expanded, and we were in the cosmic zone. And I thought, hey, working on some songs, huh? Sing a song for me. So Jim said, oh man, I don't have much of a voice. I said, come on, man, of course you got a voice. You know, Bob Dylan doesn't have much of a voice. You can do fine. Just go ahead and sing. You know, it's just you and me here. I'm not going to judge your singing voice. I just want to hear your words and, you know, what you got in your head. So he squats down in the sand and he digs his hands into the sand. He gets 2 handfuls of sand and he kind of squeezes really tight and it starts streaming out from his fingers. And I see these rivulets of sand, this waterfall of sand coming out. And he said, okay, here's one I got called Moonlight Drive. And he starts to sing. And I heard these words, man. It was like, let's swim to the moon. Let's climb through the tide. Penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide. And I thought, whoa, those are just too cool. That's psychedelic. I've never heard lyrics like that for rock and roll. So as he's singing it, I'm hearing the chord changes behind it and hearing the things that I could do musically, and it's kind of got a funk groove to it. And it's kind of like, let's swim to the moon. Let's climb through the tide. I'm playing. And Jim is singing in this Chet Baker voice. He had this haunted voice. I thought he had one of the best quality voices I'd ever heard. If any of you know who Chet Baker is, he's a trumpet player, and he has this kind of whispery, kind of soft, haunted voice. And here's Morrison on the beach singing Moonlight Drive to me in a decidedly Chet Baker voice, right on pitch, right on tone, and right in the rhythm. He had this nice sense of rhythm, and it just kind of went ka-chunka, chunka, chunka, chunka. And it was hypnotic, man. I was feeling what he was doing. I thought, this is too cool. And he sang the rest of the song, and I said, man, I love it. This is incredible. I said, do you have anything else? And he said, yeah, I've got a couple of other things. One's called Summer's Almost Gone. I got another one called My Eyes Have Seen You. And I said, My Eyes Have Seen You? Oh, this is amazing. And then he sang My Eyes Have Seen You. He did a little of Summer's Almost Gone. And I thought, I don't believe this, man. These are the best songs. I told him, I said, Jim, these are the best songs I've ever heard for rock and roll. With those lyrics, what I can do on the keyboards playing behind that, man, we got to get a rock and roll band together. And he looked at me and he said, Ray, that's exactly what I had in mind. And I said, cool, man. All right. What do we call the band, though? I said, whoops, wait a minute. Okay, let's get realistic here. We got a rock and roll band. He's a great singer. I'm a great keyboard player. And he looks great. And I thought to myself, and I didn't say this to him, I thought, the girls are going to absolutely fall in love with this guy. The lyrics are great. The music is going to be great. We are going to be spooky, weird, and psychedelic. And on top of it, we got probably the best looking guy I have seen in a long time, since Steve McQueen. It was like a running battle. Who was the best looking guy? Was it James Dean? James Dean was gone. Okay, you got Steve McQueen and Jim Morrison. My bet would go with Jim Morrison. I thought he looked better than Steve McQueen. So I said to him, okay, this is great. What do we call the band? And he said, The Doors. I said, the what? The Doors? That's the most ridiculous. Oh, wait a minute. I said, wait a minute. You mean like the doors of perception? He said, exactly. I said, the doors in your mind, you opening? He said, exactly. I said, oh, Jim, too cool, man. That is too hip. What Morrison had and what I was hearing, my organ and my piano playing behind him, was psychedelic. I said, Jim, man, there's nobody doing this. What we're going to do, nobody on the planet is doing what we're doing. This music is called psychedelic. Ray Manzarek had a life, before the Doors got started. And this might be a good opportunity to do a quick capsule of the life of Raymond Daniel Manzarek, born February 12, 1939, on the south side of Chicago, Illinois. So basically what I did is I grew up on the south side of Chicago, 35th and Western, approximately 35th and Western, McKinley Park area. Went to a little grammar school called Everett School, 34th and Bell Avenue, and then did my grammar school there 8 years, and went off to St. Rita High School, 63rd and Western at the time. Manzarek is a Polish name. Third generation. Let's see. My grandparents came over in the great migration to America from Eastern and Southern Europe, and so we went to school. That's what we did. We went to university. You kids are going to go to university and get a better life than we had. Okay, fair enough, Mom and Dad. We'll do that. Unfortunately, we went to college and we became artists, and I don't think that's what exactly they had in mind. We were supposed to be lawyers and doctors, and Dorothy was supposed to be a pharmacist. I was supposed to be an attorney. Jim was supposed to be a diplomat. If he wasn't going to go to the military academy, which there was no hope for him, Jim Morrison would never go to the military academy. At least he was supposed to become a diplomat. So unfortunately, to our parents' chagrin, we all became artists, and it's not exactly what they had in mind. Not only that, we became artists and heads. We became, intoxicants, people who had ingested psychedelic substances and broken on through the other side and seen through the web of Maya. And I don't think that's what our parents had in mind. But Raymond Daniel Manzarek Sr., my father, was a machinist at International Harvester in Chicago, a good UAW man. God bless him. He took me to my piano lessons, and, he took me to my basketball games when I was too young to go on my own. And, he was a marvelous, supportive father. He had no idea what the hell I was doing. But when I sat down to play the piano and played some boogie woogie and whatnot, he loved it. And my mother, Helen Kalenda, another, they're both Polish, and they're from the South Side, and she was absolutely marvelous. My mother and father were hip. My father played the guitar. My mother had a great voice. And they used to collect back in the 30s, and they told me about this, later on. They used to collect Bessie Smith records. They had 78s of blues people and Bessie Smith and all kinds of singers like that. My mother couldn't remember what the names were, but she said, we used to go to Maxwell Street and we'd go into these little record stores. I mean, they weren't even stores. They would have just a sort of a rug hanging to keep the cold out, and you'd go in behind the rug and they would have records. They would have just the greatest music playing, Raymond. I tell you, those black people, they've got it. Yeah, Mom, I agree. Those black people, they've got it. So my parents, being musically astute, certainly not classical buffs or anything, but they loved the blues. They loved the African American music. It had gotten right into their soul. So they thought it would be a good thing for me to take piano lessons. Thank God they didn't have me on the accordion because, early 50s in Chicago, lots of people played the accordion. Probably from 8 or so to 11, after practicing, I finally heard something that I liked. And that's the thing that really did it. I heard Albert Ammons and Pinetop Smith. Those two guys, man, God almighty. Once you've heard Boogie Woogie, if you're a piano player and you're playing that little stride piano, which is kind of just a silly little, vaguely white man kind of thing, and you hear a black guy playing a boogie-woogie piano. That is it. That left hand was just a killer. And I said, that is what I'm going to learn how to do. And I sat there working on my left hand over and over and over, trying to get that dun 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 dun, trying to get that beat, that thing, that repetitive. What was great about it, and what eventually translated into the Doors, is that that left hand became the left hand for the Doors. That is the bass. I played the left hand, with my left hand in the Doors, I played the piano bass, utilizing the same techniques, more or less, hypnotic drone, that I discovered in playing boogie woogie at 11, 12 years old on the south side of Chicago. And that is the key to the whole Doors thing. It's basically, from my perspective, it's basically a boogie woogie piano, a linear line, but a boogie woogie piano technique with a hypnotic drone, over and over and over the same lines. Like the solo for Light My Fire is A minor to B minor. It's just a simple triad, A, C, E, B, D, F sharp. So it's dun 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 dun, over and over. And on top of that, then I could solo the same way a boogie woogie piano player would do it. I would solo and begin to do all kinds of things. After I finished my solo, Robbie Krieger gets to do his solo. The guitar player just solos and solos and solos. And then the two of us do sort of a contrapuntal thing together. Meanwhile, that left hand is doing exactly the same thing that it started off doing. Dun, 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 dun. And that's boogie woogie piano. Softball in Chicago, we used to play with a large softball. You just float that thing in, man. You put all your body into it. I was pumping iron at home. I started working out. I was getting strong. I was getting up to about 135 pounds, 12 years old, man. Put that ball in front of me, man. Let me hit that ball. It's our turn to bat. I'm the second batter this inning. First guy up, whatever he does. Just as I'm about to get up to bat, man, the whole point of the ball game, for me, just about to get up to bat, I hear off to the right-hand side of the playground a mournful sound. The radio was turned to a station that I had no idea what it was. I heard this mournful wail of a harmonica. I heard a backbeat behind it, 2 and 4, emphasis on the 2 and 4. And I heard an electric guitar playing some snaky kind of, I don't know what, man. It was just like a snake was playing. A backbeat was going on 2 and 4. A harmonica was crying, moaning in the moonlight. And then a man's voice came in, full and deep and throaty and full of an anguish and a passion and a knowledge that I'd never heard before. I heard that music and I just stopped halfway between the batter's box and where I was. And I looked over there, and the guy behind me said, "Hey, Ray, get in there, man. Get in there and hit. It's your turn. Come on, get up there, man." And I turned around to him, and I gave him the bat, and I said, "Here, man, you go ahead and hit. I got to see what this is over here." And off I went, man, sacrificing my turn at bat to hear this music. And I got closer and closer to the radio, and when I got there, I didn't even know what it was, man, but I'll tell you, now I know what it was. It was the blues. It was the south side of Chicago. I don't know who the artist was. It could have been Muddy. It could have been John Lee Hooker. It could have been Magic Sam. It could have been Howlin' Wolf. It could have been any one of 100 guys. Well, when I heard that music, I thought, oh my God, this is the most brilliant music I've ever heard. This has got the wail of a lost soul. It's got the snakiness. It's got a rhythm to it. It's got a fury and a passion and a compassion. The singer's voice was just so full of wisdom and full of pain at the same time. And I heard, you know what it did? It connected with my Slavic roots, you know, because Slavic music, when you listen to Russian classical music, Slavic music is so mournful and deep and kind of heavy. But when you put that with a 2 and 4 backbeat, man, and you put a blues, a 1-4-5 progression behind it, changed my whole life. That was it. I even had to give up my turn at bat for the blues. My father had finally gotten to the age where I was old enough to go with my father down to Maxwell Street every once in a while, where they grew up. My father and mother grew up down in that area of Chicago, and we went down to Maxwell Street every once in a while on a Sunday to there was an outdoor market, a big outdoor market in the quote-unquote ghetto, and all kinds of things were for sale. And my father knew a lot of guys down there. He knew some of the people that had the wholesale outlets, and we would go down and buy a large bottle of Vitalis hair tonic, and occasionally we would go in and buy some shoes or something from some of the guys he knew. You know, it was. And he would introduce me. This is my son. Hey, Ray, haven't seen you in a long time. How you been? This is my son, Ray Jr. Hi. Hello, Mr. Bernstein. How are you? Very good. Thank you, sir. Nice to meet you. Okay. You know, when that kid's ready to get a nice suit, Ray, for graduation, you bring him down here. And I did. I went down to Maxwell Street and got just one of the sharpest suits I've ever worn in my life from Mr. Bernstein that my father had known. And it was a cool one-button roll, man, and a sort of a deep powder blue with a long lime-colored tie. I wore to graduation from grammar school. It was cool. It was like, I looked like Bo Diddley or something, a Mr. B collar at the time, and it was just a whole jelly roll kind of thing going on. And the guys that I met were great. That was the first time I'd ever experienced a corned beef sandwich. We walked into one of the delis down on Maxwell Street. The smells hit my nose, and I thought, I am in meat heaven. The garlic and the steam tables, and I saw huge mounds of corned beef and sliced and stacks of rye bread with all sliced, ready to go. Huge mounds of onions and Chicago hot dogs, man, on a grill. Dozens of them with a mound of onions just waiting to make you those Chicago Red Hots. You want a Red Hot? Hey, kid, how about a Red Hot? You want Ray, you want a corned beef? Man, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. It was a nose experience, olfactory experience, like my oral experience of hearing the blues. And it had our sandwich. I had a hot dog, of course. You got to have a Chicago Red Hot. My father had a corned beef, and then we went out onto the street, walking down the street, and saw the outdoor blues players on the south side of Chicago and Maxwell Street, man, doing some religious things and just doing some blues things, some bottleneck stuff, little tiny amps. And when I actually saw the dudes doing it live, I thought, this is unreal. This is absolutely unreal. You know what I thought? I thought white people are not capable of this. There is a soul, there is a grace, there is a dignity, there is a passion, and there is another place that you can go to that white people just can't at that particular time. This is like, whatever, 54, 55, something like that. White people are not allowed to go there. Thank God, what has happened since is that rock and roll and the blues have opened up that area of passion to white people, and we are all able to share, through the genius of people like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker and Jimmy Reed and Magic Sam, and then Chuck Berry, the inventor of rock and roll, as far as I'm concerned, and Little Richard and all the rockers. We are able to share share a common space now. White and black can share a common music, and the musical destiny of America is no longer racially exclusive. All we have to do is take what we know about each other musically and bring that together into our day-to-day lives, and America will realize its destiny in the 21st century as this great democratic, multiracial society that it was always intended to be. And it's going to be an absolutely delightful, peaceful, thrilling, exciting place to be, in which all the races will live together in harmony. See how good it is for brethren to dwell together in harmony. And man, that's what was happening on the south side of Chicago, 1954 on Maxwell Street. Watching the guys play the music out of these tiny little funky amps was an absolutely thrilling experience. I'm in St. Rita High School, and the next momentous event after hearing the blues and discovering the blues is listening to the blues on the radio in Chicago. Now, this is exciting. The radio in Chicago had rhythm and blues stations. There was a disc jockey called Al Benson. There was another one called Big Bill Hill. Al Benson would be on, all afternoon. I mean, he would be on. As soon when I can't come home from school, he was on. He was on all afternoon until about 9 o'clock at night. 9 o'clock at night, Big Bill Hill would take over. Al Benson played rhythm and blues, man. He played the blues. It wasn't rhythm and blues. It was blues. Here's a new record by Muddy Waters. It's called I'm a Man. Here's a new record by Howlin' Wolf, and you'd hear one of Howlin' Wolf's songs, Moanin' in the Moonlight, that great album of Howlin' Wolf's, Moanin' in the Moonlight, Smokestack Lightnin'. That's the one that killed me, man. All of this stuff is on the radio, man, and I'm 16 years old. I'm a junior at St. Rita High School with 2,000 guys. Nothing is going on. I've never been laid. I don't know at the time I'd even kissed a girl. I don't know how do you even meet a girl? How do you talk to a girl? But man, on the radio it was just going. It was just cooking. It was pure sex, pure energy, pure power, and pure passion. I tell you, man, the radio saved my life, saved my soul. So I'm also listening to Willie Dixon. He was he was the songwriter, and only later did I learn that Willie Dixon was the guy who had written so many of those songs. And as it, of course, happens, the Doors do Backdoor Man, which is a great Willie Dixon song, originally performed by Howlin' Wolf, but only later did we learn that it was actually attributed to Willie Dixon. So we were all in love with the blues, everybody on the Doors, and the album Absolutely Live, the Doors live album Absolutely Live, opens with our tribute to Bo Diddley, in which we do Who Do You Love? So as I'm growing up, hearing this stuff on the south side of Chicago, saving my soul, actually giving me something to live for other than my, lust for women who I had no way of ever meeting, or, girls in the neighborhood, certainly no girls in school, and because there were nothing but 2,000 guys at St. Rita High School. Then what comes along? This is great. Elvis Presley on TV. The Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey show summer replacement for the Jackie Gleason hour, and they had Elvis Presley on TV, national TV. I wasn't even in the room, and I was, and it might 7, 8 o'clock at night, I forget what it was, and I might have been in another room reading or something, now watching, who cares about Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, corny old big band stuff. My mother calls me, Raymond, come in here. You better see this guy. He's a real cool cat. You like this kind of stuff. And I hear, well, there's one for the money. a 2 for the show, a 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you run into the living room, look at the TV set, and there's Elvis Presley doing blue suede shoes, man. What a killer. I mean, it just absolutely blew me. Finally, a white guy. You know, because I'd been listening to all the black guys doing it. I'm a white guy, you know, and I'm trying to imitate the black guys doing Muddy and Jimmy Reed and John Lee Hooker and Howlin' Wolf to the best of my abilities, limited abilities. And here's a white guy doing blue suede shoes. He was dressed in a cream-colored suit. He had a dark shirt on. He had a cream-colored tie. He had Scotty Moore on guitar. He had, Bill Black on bass. And DJ Fontana was the drummer, man. And it was like... God, they had it, man. They had it, and it was country. What was cool about it? It was a country kind of thing. It wasn't a big city Chicago sound with the mournful wailing that I was used to. It was a little more. It was a little lighter and a little more up, even though it was blue suede shoes and it was a funky song. It had a little country thing to it because it was like sort of an acoustic guitar. And I thought, this is too cool, man. And after that, that was it. I mean, the whole floodgates just exploded with rock and roll. As soon as that was on TV, man, the radio was just playing Little Richard, and the radio was playing Jerry Lee Lewis, and it was Fats Domino, and my God, rock and roll just absolutely exploded. The first wave of rock, and it swept America, and every white kid in America went totally bonkers, totally insane, and just went absolutely fuck crazy. And their parents knew that this is the end of Western civilization as we now know it. Our teenage daughters are completely gone, and they're listening to this wild, insane, crazed music. And the boys, of course, who were sex mad to begin with anyway, now had this thrusting, gyrating pelvic movement of Elvis Presley to try on the daughters of America. We went mad. Television was cool at the time, too. You saw a lot of the people on TV, man. Jerry Lee Lewis, you'd see Jerry Lee Lewis on TV. You'd see Little Richard on TV. I saw Bo Diddley on TV, you know. And for me, it was more, it wasn't so much the physical movement of the performer. It was the psychic space that the performer created. That's the place I entered into. Because in music, you can close your eyes. You know, you don't have to. When the Doors performed on stage, I'd close my eyes. I wasn't watching Morrison perform. You know, Morrison didn't have to perform. Morrison's throat was performing. Morrison's words were performing. He was creating a psychic space. The four of us were all in a space that had to do with the psyche and had nothing to do with the visualization. Rock and roll is not supposed to be a show. Rock and roll is supposed to be a psychic event in which you lower yourself down into the unconscious and you tap into that collective consciousness that permeates the earth, the serpent power, the serpentine powers of the telluric force, the very power of the planet, the Dionysian powers of regeneration. That's what rock and roll is supposed to get into. That's what I saw Muddy Waters get into. That's what a Doors concert was all about. What Morrison did on stage, I could care less. Who cares what he does? He's jumping around. I don't care that he's jumping around. Listen to the man sing his songs. Listen to Jim Morrison sing, I'm a backdoor man. Listen to Jim Morrison say, break on through to the other side. You know, the day destroys the night. Night divides the day. We tried to run, tried to hide. Break on through to the other side. That for me was the whole thing, man. So on stage, I would just close close my eyes, put my head down, shake myself, my head back and forth, left to right, and get myself into a hypnotic trance. Left hand's playing the bass, right hand is doing all the Bach filigrees, Bach and Bill Evans, and a little Stravinsky and Debussy thrown in there, and Morrison's taking us into a shamanic psychic space. That's what the Doors were all about. I'm in DePaul University, working with a couple of dudes, playing a little bit of rock and roll here, a little rock and roll there. One of my high school buddies, Fred Hindle, played drums, and so played some little lounge gigs with him, and Dennis, whose last name slips my mind, played some little guitar and stuff. And somehow or another, I had met a woman manager agent who had a songwriter son. I believe her son was a songwriter, a son or certainly someone she was managing. He and I got together, and he had a song called "Now Look What You Done." And I heard read the words, and thought, you know, this would be a real good kind of bluesy thing. Let me put some blues to this. So eventually the song became, now look what you done, now look at you left me here, the lonely one, and all I can say is look what you done. The shadows cry today, and memories fall, something like that. Blues and memories, and I recall, your love was my life, as warm as the sun, and all I can say is look what you done. So it was a country, actually what this guy was a country writer, but because of the whole rock and roll thing between country and blues becoming rock and roll with Elvis Presley and all those other cats, and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins, who was incredible, and all of that stuff coming out of Sun was country and western and blues. So that's what this guy was, basically a country and western writer. But I put the blues thing to it. And the lady said she was going to go off and do something with it and maybe take it around to some of the blues guys. And I said, hey, that sounds fabulous. Let me know if somebody does it. 6 months later, I hear the song on the radio, man. Muddy Waters has a new single out. This is the B-side of Muddy Waters' single. Al Benson has flipped it over. I forget what the single was. He flipped it over. Let's play the B-side. It's a song called Now Look What You Done. It's by Muddy Waters. I went out and bought the record thinking, oh my God, Muddy Waters has actually recorded one of my songs. I get the record and I look at the record. It says, Now Look What You Done, written by M. Morganfield. Oh God. So we never got nothing out of it, you know. And then later on, who covers the song but the Rolling Stones, you know? And I thought, wait a minute, don't I get, you know, I mean, I don't necessarily want the publishing on it, but don't I get half of the composer on it, for God's sake? Blues and memories, and I recall your love was my life, as warm as the sun. Sing it, Mick. And all I can say is look what you done. God, all these guys covering the song, but I was very proud, you know. And it's our little secret. Only the people who are listening to this, you and I, will know about it. I had done 2 solid semesters of film school, and my relationship with this girl just fell apart. She wanted to get married, and I don't know why she wanted to get married. I didn't want to get married, and then she broke up with me. I thought, you can't break up with me. but. So she left me and went off with some other guy. And I was heartbroken. So I thought, God, man, I'm heartbroken. So I thought, you know what? And I have to be a soldier or something. I thought, well, you know, since I'm heartbroken and completely distraught, this might be a good opportunity to leave this situation, do my military obligation, and get into something, get into cinema. I mean, they have cameramen and stuff, and something in photography or something like that. So that was the next stupid decision I made. Law school and joining the Army were two of the dumbest things I've ever done. I joined the Army and I was going to get into be a cinematographer, be a cameraman. Thank God I didn't, because it was just before Vietnam broke out, and Vietnam could have, the Vietnam War. I could have been a cameraman out in the jungle in Vietnam. That's what would have happened to me. So, my God, what have I done? That would have been hysterical. You know, I was out there with a little 16 millimeter Bell and Howell, trying to block bullets in the middle of the jungle, man. So I became a darkroom man. I got into darkroom, which that was great. They sent me to Fort Monmouth in New Jersey after I did my basic training at Fort Ord, and went to Fort Monmouth in New Jersey and learned darkroom, still development of still photographs, and that was absolutely fabulous. And I was there for maybe 6 months or so. This, and dig it, this is what's really great about the whole thing, is that I am right outside of New York City. I am 22 years old. I got a couple of bucks in my pocket because I'm in the military. There is a bus that stops right in front of Fort Monmouth, very close to Red Bank. Count Basie, kid from Red Bank, New Jersey. A couple of stops away, bus stops right in front of there, takes you all the way into the bus terminal, 43rd and whatever the heck it is, in the middle of New York City, man. I got on that bus, I went into New York City the first weekend I had, and I went every weekend into the city after that. I thought, this is heaven. I am home. As great as California was, it's a whole different thing. New York City is the throbbing, vital, artistic core of the world. This is it, man. I saw Coltrane. I saw John Coltrane Quartet at Birdland. I saw Charlie Mingus rehearsing his band on a Monday night at the 5 Spot with Eric Dolphy playing sax and a bunch of other cats. And I was like 3 feet away at the bar. He had spread out the charts on the tables in the club because it was Monday night and there wasn't anybody there. There were a few people, there were a dozen people there. I'm sitting next to Charlie Mingus calling Eric Dolphy on the carpet. No, stop, Eric, right here. Look, check it right here, man. Just read it right here. Go ahead, play it one time yourself. Go play that, Eric. And Eric played it. You got it? Yeah, I got it. Oh, okay. All right, let's take it again. And then they're off doing something, man. And then I finished up my schooling, darkroom studies, and they sent me off to Okinawa. And Okinawa was like, whoa, I am in the Orient. This is incredible. I was a darkroom man, but I didn't. I wasn't assigned to the darkroom in Okinawa. And this was fabulous, man. They shipped me off instead to Thailand. Now, you know what grows in Thailand. you ever hear of Thai stick? So on the way to Thailand, we're going to go to some place called Koh Rat, Thailand. The middle of nowhere, man, on the big plain, the central plain. Unfortunately, I wasn't down in the tropical lushness, loveliness, or in Bangkok or anything. But on the way to Thailand, on one of these big monster, jumbo moving people mover, equipment movers, we landed in Vietnam. So I was actually in Vietnam, in Saigon, at the Saigon airport. I wasn't allowed to leave the airport. I was in Vietnam for 3 hours, And I must say, I saw some of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. Those Vietnamese women with the owl dye, I think it's called, the long dress that they wear that's slit all the way up, and it's just, God, it's just flowing. And you could see that they were absolutely gorgeous. The women were so beautiful and so graceful and so delicate. And the fact that a whole war took place there and the slaughter was like totally insane, because it was just absolutely, it was a lovely country, just all around the airport, palm trees, and it was just, the smell in the air was just of flowers. So the fact that what went on there is a real tragedy. So 3 hours, I spent 3 hours in Vietnam, off to Thailand, man, where I got my hands on the Thai stick and the Thai weed. Holy cow, man, was that stuff strong. I remember sitting one Saturday afternoon, we had gone to into town. You could go into town and you could buy your mixed marijuana, cigarette, betel nut, maybe some pipe tobacco. We went into this one guy's place, and he's got a big chopping block and a bolo knife. It's about a 2.5 by 2.5 square of wood and a big bolo knife, and he's got clumps of Thai marijuana, pipe tobacco, Lucky Strike tobacco, and betel nut. And he would make a mixture and chop it up, the same way you would be chopping up parsley. He would chop it up with his big bolo knife and, give you like about a half a pound of it for, I don't know, $2. Half a pound, because it was like nothing. I mean, the stuff grew all over the place. There was no big deal to them. And we smoked that, went back to the base and smoked that stuff, man. And for the first time in my life, I realized the meaning of the word stoned. I sat in a chair in the hot Thai afternoon, in the hot Thai sun, and every 5 minutes, I was unable to move. Every 5 minutes, I would have to put my tongue back into my mouth. I found that my tongue had slowly, like a snake, very imperceptibly come out between my teeth, between my lips, and down my chin. And there it was. And I'd be sitting there with my tongue all the way out of my mouth. At the furthest point it would go. And at that point I would go, gulp, and push my tongue back into my mouth. Sat there for 4 hours, man, stoned, in an absolute state of bliss. Now, isn't it interesting that I actually spent those 3 hours in Vietnam, in the Saigon airport, in the Saigon, the military base, and about 5 to 6 years later, the Doors become the #1 band in Vietnam. Jimi Hendrix, of course, and the Doors, man. Guys have come up to me and said, you guys are the soundtrack to the Vietnam War. Apocalypse Now, the movie. And these are guys who were actually there. They said, man, you and Jimi Hendrix. Well, what's interesting about all of this stuff, the reason I'm telling you all of these things is that this all goes to make up what the soul of the Doors is, and I'm here talking to you as Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player of the Doors, and we want to know about the Doors. The Doors are these experiences, all of these things that happened to me and certainly happened to Jim, because Jim was into the same sort of thing, more or less, I was a little older than him, but he was a devotee of Tennessee Williams. Jim had done the set decoration for a performance of a Tennessee Williams play back in Florida at St. Petersburg College, or wherever the heck he was down there in Florida. Jim had done the scenic backdrop for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Whether he acted in the play or not, I don't know. But what he did was he had a slide of a canvas cancer cell. Now, Big Daddy is dying in the play, the Tennessee Williams Cat in a Hot Tin Roof. The movie is available, so you can watch it on video or laser disc. And a slide of a cancer cell, what Jim did is have that cancer cell enlarging, slowly enlarging through the entire course of the play, until at the end of the play, we find out that Big Daddy is indeed dying of cancer, not as we thought. He hasn't kicked it at all, and this cancer cell has covered the entire back of the theater, the entire back wall. So, Morrison was into the same thing I was into. He went to the film school at UCLA because he had seen the same films I'd seen. He'd seen Black Orpheus, and he'd seen The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman's movie, The Seventh Seal, in which death plays chess with the night. You know that thing about death and the night playing chess. You got to see this movie. It's a great movie. Jim saw the movie. It came time to decide what he was going to do with his life. He was going to go to UCLA to make films, because the whole point of making films was that it combined all the arts. It combined theater, it combined photography. For me, it combined music, and that was great. You could put music to movies, and you've got acting in the movie, so you've got all of this you've got photography, you've got acting, you've got theater, you've got music, you've got everything. All of the arts combine into the cinema. So that's the thing that put me into the cinema department at UCLA. That's the same thing that put Morrison into the cinema department. And then all of our artistic background gets thrown into the doors. How do we bring this stuff into the doors? How do we bring the drama? How do we bring the melody? How do we bring the joy, the pathos, the sorrow, the terror? How do we bring the terror into rock and roll music? That's what the Doors were all about. Well, Jim and I met at the UCLA Film School. Obviously, we were both film students, and we got together through a good friend named John DeBella. John DeBella was my cameraman on Evergreen, and was Jim's cameraman on the Jim Morrison student movie that had no title and has long since disappeared. So John introduced me to Jim, and John was a poet, Jim was a poet, I was the jazzer, musician, blues guy, not being a poet myself. Jim lived by himself. He had an apartment, my goodness gracious. So there were very few people that had as nice an apartment as Jim. Not that it was elaborate or anything, but obviously his mother and father had a couple of bucks, because as Dorothy said, look, he has an electric blanket. He must have money. Look at his socks, she said. I said, look at his socks. She said, these are expensive socks, Ray. Okay, honey, if you say so. He's got to have money. And Jim had an interesting apartment. One wall was filled with books, and the other wall was a continuing collage, just running along the wall, this huge, long collage, this stripe running along for it was 9 to 10 feet long, and you would look at it and it was like a Japanese scroll is what it was. And it was a picture story. It was a picture scroll, and it was like, I never did figure out what story it was telling. I don't think it was telling any story. It was like what Jim was doing poetically. It was a collision of images, Eisensteinian collision of images, a juxtaposition. And, he would have, I remember one thing, he had some gorgeous model next to a shot of 4 Marines lounging about in a state of déshabille. Anyway, these Marines were lounging about without shirts on, and in a very relaxed, sort of very sensuous. Genet would have loved it. It was Jean Genet, the author, would have absolutely loved it, and it was a state of ease. And they're juxtaposed up against this beautiful model. And coming out from them is a snake and the snake moves into an elephant, and then there's an African scene, and it just kind of just kept on going and going. So Jim was the first guy I ever knew to actually have a collage on his wall next to his huge wall of books. And, you know, the story goes of Jim Morrison that he was able to tell you the title and the author of any book he had. He would challenge people. Take a book, I'm going to turn my back, take a book off the shelf, open it to any page, read me a line or two or three, you know, maybe I'll need more, maybe a paragraph. I'll tell you the title of the book and the author of the book. And the guy was on the money 95% of the time, man. Jim would have Jim's reading was very eclectic, but it was typical of your early to mid 60s hipster student. So you don't forget what we wanted to be. We wanted to be beatniks. We all wanted to be beatniks, but we were too young. We came a little bit too late to enter into true beatnickery. And but we were worshippers of the beat generation. So everything that Kerouac wrote, everything that Allen Ginsberg wrote, Michael McClure's writings, Gregory Corso, John Cleland Holmes, Go, all of that stuff, all of the beat writers filled Morrison's shelf, along with James Joyce, along with Céline. So all the antecedents to the beat generation were the same books that we were all reading. So Céline's Journey to the End of the Night, you know, Journey. So one of our songs is called The End of the Night, you know, take the highway to the end of the night. So, I mean, Jim was borrowing, as I was borrowing quotes from all my favorite jazz musicians and blues musicians, Jim was borrowing quotes from all of his favorite writers. So, you know, I mean, even the name The Doors, from the line by William Blake, if the doors of perception were cleansed, man would see things as they truly are, ... infinite. And then Aldous Huxley takes that line, if the doors of perception, calls his book The Doors of Perception, and then Jim said, let's call the band The Doors. So we were always borrowing from past artists. So that Morrison's shelf of books was very eclectic, but standard evergreen review, New York City, hipster, San Francisco hipster, beat, jivester, jivnik, and we all had the same books. You know, John DeBella had the same books as Jim had, as I had, as Dennis Jacobs had, and a bunch of the other guys had. And so to this day, one of the things that I have in my collection is I actually have one of Jim's books. I have Jim's dictionary. It doesn't have his name in it, but has a UCLA student stamp from 1963. And I said to the people at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they said, do you have Jim Morrison's leather pants? I said, why would I have Jim Morrison's leather pants? I don't have Jim's leather pants. Jim has his leather pants. Why would I have his pants? Do you think Jim Morrison has a pair of my shoes? You know, no, I don't have Jim's clothes. What are you talking about? It's absurd. I said, but I do have Jim Morrison's dictionary. Now, what could be more valuable to a poet than his dictionary? They said, we don't want his dictionary, we want his leather pants. And then go, fuck yourself. You know, who cares what you want? I have his dictionary. Don't you understand? Jim's a poet. That's why the Doors were put together. Poetry and rock and roll. Like the beatniks do poetry and jazz, we're doing poetry and rock and roll with a jazz influence, eclectic rock and roll, Spanish flamenco, jazz, classical, all of it, blues brought into this music with Jim as a poet. He's a poet. Here's his dictionary. And I said, is it signed? I said, he didn't sign his dictionary. Why would anyone sign their dictionary? It's a dictionary. Don't you know what the karma that goes with this? The chi, the energy, the psychic energy that exists in this book, man. This is his. And I said, we don't want it. Said, okay, very good. So I still have it at home and still use it to this day, and it's the family dictionary, and we're taking good care of it. And who knows? Someday somebody will realize that Jim Morrison's dictionary is more valuable than his dick. I mean, than his leather pants. I read On the Road probably in 1958, little paperback edition. I didn't read the hardback edition, so 58, 59, I guess, is when I first read it, published in 1957. And now at UCLA, spring break, so jump quickly up to UCLA. Spring break is going on one year, 62, 63. On spring break, we go up to San Francisco because San Francisco is fabulous. The beat scene is virtually over with by then, except everybody is still around. There's just not a scene going on there. We get to Berkeley, and somebody had an apartment, so we could crash on the floor in Berkeley and fool around in San Francisco, clown around in San Francisco. And what is going on? A poetry reading in San Francisco. And listen to this, man. Lou Welch, who had just come out of the forest after being in solo hibernation, isolation for about 2 or 3 years, Gary Snyder had just come back from Japan. This is his first trip to Japan. Gary Snyder had come back after being over in Japan for a year, dressed in his Japanese schoolboy outfit. And Philip Whalen, who is now a Zen Roshi, Philip Whalen was going to read. This was going to take place in San Francisco, and I thought, this is an actual poetry reading. I have never been to an actual poetry reading. So Dorothy and I drove across the bridge into San Francisco from Berkeley. We got there. There were 2,000 people at this poetry reading, man. The place was electric. I thought I was in Russia. It was like revolutionary Russia when the poets, when Mayakovsky and Anna Akhmatova and like that were reading. There was so much vitality and energy in the air. Lou Welch got on stage and started to read, and it was sizzling. It was crackling. I mean, it was just amazing. And he was trying to be peaceful and gentle and just tell you about the forest and the diving into his soul and the depths of his soul and what was going on. And the electricity was just, it was palpable. After Lou Welch, in a standing ovation, man, 2,000 people screaming, Lou, 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 and applauding for him. Out comes Philip Whalen. Philip Whalen hadn't become a Zen monk yet. He was a local guy in San Francisco. Philip Whalen gets on stage and proceeds to read at the fastest pace I had ever heard. He is just going a mile a minute. He's coasting on the energy, man. Whether he was speeding or not, I don't know. He didn't have to be, because the energy of those 2,000 people was so intense, and that he's surfing across the top of it, and he's going as fast as he can possibly go. 10 minutes into his reading, some guy stands up and he says, "Read slower, Philip, read slower." Philip stops, looks at him and says, "Listen harder." And just goes, continuing, tearing on, man. And after that, out came Gary Snyder. And Gary Snyder was, absolutely mesmerizing, and received a standing ovation at the end of his Zen-like explorations. So that was one of the greatest poetry moments of my life. And this was like 62, 3, 4. And then when Morrison came along with his poetry, I thought, man, this is going to be fantastic. Jim's got that same kind of aura about him that the Beats had. He's got that same literary gift. He was definitely gifted as far as being a literary person. He could put words together. And I thought, this is going to be fabulous, man. The Doors are going to absolutely do something that is going to be unique. At the time, I thought it was unique. I didn't think it would stay unique because it was no big deal. You know, there's plenty of poets and plenty of musicians that could do what we do. You know, I don't think it's really kind of happened. I've been kind of surprised that more people haven't explored the same areas that we've explored. I mean, big deal, you know. Doors aren't geniuses or anything. You know, throw a little Carl Jung and John Coltrane together. That's all you got to do, for God's sake. You know, that's not too hard. Get your Thelonious Monk and your Muddy Waters and put some French Symbolist poetry over it. That's, you know, I know you guys and girls can do it out there. Go ahead and do it. So another time I was up in San Francisco on another spring break was, and what is playing in Berkeley, this is fabulous. What is going on in Berkeley is the premiere of Jean Genet, the great writer, and who we consider to be a beatnik. He was French. Jean Genet's movie, Un Chant d'amour. And it's a story of homosexual love in a prison. And it's pretty racy and pretty steamy stuff. And Dorothy and I and this other girl that were with, Judy Raphael, we all went to see it. And we're sitting there watching it, and this is hot, man. This is one hot, forbidden movie. So if you get a chance to see it, it's an avant-garde, one of those black and white avant-garde films. Definitely see it. And the movie's going along about halfway through it. It's not too long. There was a long thing at the beginning, but halfway through the Genet movie, I get tapped on the shoulder and turn around, and who is it? It's Morrison. He says, "Hey, man, what are you doing here?" I said, "Come to see the movie. What about you?" He said, "Ditto. I came to see the movie, too." I said, "All right. Well, it's obviously meant to be, man. The same place at the same time." I come back to UCLA, back into my baby's arms, Dorothy. Dorothy and I set up housekeeping, get ourselves a little place down in Venice. And I'm going to UCLA, and we had very little money. She would get $25 a week as divorce money from her father's support money. That was the money child support he had to pay. So she got $25 a week. And I was playing at the time with my brother's surf band, Rick and the Ravens. My brother Rick, the guitar player, and Jim, the harmonica player, keyboard player. And they had a surf band out of Redondo Beach, and surf music was very big at the time. And they had a couple of guys. They had a saxophone player and a bass player and a drummer, and they played gigs around the South Bay. And occasionally I would sit in as the blues man. And I was screaming Ray Daniels. Obviously couldn't use a name like Manzarek, for God's sake. I mean, it's not a, show busy kind of name. So I was the blues man, and I would come up towards the end of the set, and they would play their surf songs, and I would come up and do some Chicago blues. We'd do 2 or 3, 4, I'm a King Bee, and probably end with Got My Mojo Working, because I was always a rousing, Muddy Waters, rousing set closer. And we would do the blues. My brother Jim played a great harp. He would go from the piano to the harp, and I would play the piano and sing. And we got a job Friday and Saturday nights at the Turkey Joint West in Santa Monica. And Dorothy always loved the name. She said, "Is there a Turkey Joint East somewhere? Why is it called the Turkey Joint West?" I said, "Honey, I have no idea. Probably it's on the ocean. Maybe that's why it's west." She said, "But just consider the idea of the Turkey Joint East." So on Friday and Saturday nights, we made $15 a man per night. So that was $30. So between Dorothy's 25 and my 30, that was $55 a week. And that kept us going, paid our rent and paid our food bill and whatnot, and kept us going through UCLA. So that went on for, gosh, I don't know, maybe a year or so even. And what I would do is have guys from the UCLA film department, they would all come down to, most of the people that I knew lived in Santa Monica and Venice. And people would come and come to the club, and towards the second set of the night, third set of the night, I would have the guys from the UCLA Film School come up. I would say, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some special guests in the audience tonight. Direct from the UCLA Film School, here's Paul Ferrara. Paul, come on up. And here's Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison, come on up, Jim. Let's and they would come up on stage, and we'd have 3 or 4 guys on stage singing songs. And we're going to do a rousing rendition of Louie Louie. Jim, take over, man, and start singing. So that was Jim's first experience with actually singing with a rock and roll band, was at the Turkey Joint West, backed by Rick and the Ravens, with Screaming Ray Daniels on blues vocals. And we would have a great time, man. It was getting Morrison on stage was fun. With Ferrara was there, DeBella would come by, Frank Lisiandro would be there, and a bunch of other guys. And you'd have a half dozen guys on stage singing songs. So I think that's what really got Jim kind of hooked into it. He liked that. He liked it a lot. And then, and since we were good friends and hung out a lot, I used Jim as a sideman, a substitute sideman in a Rick and the Ravens gig at a high school prom down in the marina. We were going to play with Sonny and Cher. We learned 2 Sonny and Cher songs. That's all Sonny and Cher had to do, is sing I Got You, Babe, and something else, whatever the heck song they might have had. And the gig was booked for 6 guys. The saxophone player had quit the band. We called the guy and said, listen, the saxophone player has quit. And the guy said, I don't care. We're booking it for 6 guys. You have 6 guys on that stage. So I said to Jim, hey, listen, man, I'll tell you what. You want to play a gig? He said, play a gig? I said, look, here's all you got to do. Hold a guitar. We'll run the guitar cord to the amplifier, around and into the back, and we'll turn it on. We'll turn the volume down to 0. You just stand there and play the guitar, man. Sonny and Cher never showed up. Jim Morrison played guitar, never heard a note, and I think we made $25 a piece. Morrison said, sometime much later on, he said, that was the easiest money I ever made in my life. So that was it. Jim was hooked, man. $25? Wow. And then you can sing on stage? This is what I want to do. And then Rick and the Ravens actually got a recording contract. Harry Klutzmeyer, he was in Manhattan Beach, and he was a local agent booker, and he actually got us over to World Pacific Records. Is this bizarre? Dick Bach and World Pacific Records, one of the hippest jazz labels on earth ever. The guy who recorded all of the West Coast sound, and the guy who was the recorder of Ravi Shankar. The first Ravi Shankar records, maybe they're brought out something on the East Coast, I don't know. But all the records of Ravi Shankar, I know, were all on World Pacific Records. They had set up a little rock and roll division called Aura, A-U-R-A, Aura Records. Perfect, because Dick Bach was into the whole spirituality and Eastern mysticism. And we went over there and auditioned for the guy that was running the rock and roll division, and we were signed for 3 singles. They signed us for 3 singles. So Rick and the Ravens actually recorded 3. One was called Henrietta, And the other side, I forget what the songs actually were called. I can't really remember them at this particular time. But we recorded 2 singles for Aura Records. The very first single we recorded was a song written by somebody else this guy thought was going to be a hit. The guy was running the little label, called Henrietta. We recorded right on 3rd Street. I mean, that was a recording studio in Los Angeles. It was on 3rd Street. Man, I mean, Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan and Bud Shank and Shorty Rogers and all the West Coast cats were all there. I mean, you know, Shelly Manne, all those guys recorded in that recording studio. That was Dick Bach's recording studio. And, you know, like, what an honor to play in a place like that. You know, I was aware of it. Of course, nobody else in the band knew anything about any of that kind of stuff. But, man, that was where the West Coast sound came from. And it came from Dick Bach. So what happens with Dick Bach, man, is Dick and I get to talking. Dick is a spiritual, psychedelic kind of guy. We came down to the studio to see us performing or playing a recording, and he said, "Very nice, boys, very nice." You know, he wasn't concerned one way or the other about the rock and roll aspect of the whole thing. He said, "You guys are real good," and we got to talking about spiritual matters and about LSD. And I talked to Dick about having some LSD bummers. You know, I had attained my state of bliss and state of oneness through the ingestion of LSD, but I had also experienced hell. And I was right in the middle of one of these bummer periods, trying to put the whole thing together, trying to figure out, you know, why don't I have these blissful experiences like I had? Why have I been having these bummer experiences? And Dick said to me, "You know what you ought to do, man?" He said, because I saw the Ravi Shankar records and felt I could speak to him about this sort of thing. And he said, "You ought to get involved. There's an Indian guru who is setting up a program here in Los Angeles. His name is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the Maharishi. He gave me a couple of records that he had made with the Maharishi, and he said, just listen to what this guy is talking about." Well, the Maharishi on the records went on and on and on and just talked, put you in a hypnotic trance just from his talking. The guy just went on and on and on. And I said, well, to Dick, I said, after listening to it, I said, well, you know, quite frankly, you know, I'm not getting anything out of the records, but what is this mantra thing that he's talking about? And Dick said, that's what you got to do, man. He said, what you've got to do is go to this course, series of 6 lectures, and they give you a mantra. Now, what we were trying to do at the time was to attain what is called a natural high. How to stay high, like you're on LSD, without ingesting LSD. That was the whole point of it, a natural high. He said, that's what this is. This is what this is all about. And he gave me the address of where this thing was going to take place, this little course, this lecture series was going to take place. And Dorothy and I went. Now, how this impacts the Doors is, guess who else is in that course of 6 lectures at the Maharishi's Meditation Center, or at somebody's house. It was actually at somebody's house in Pacific Palisades. In that course of approximately 20 other people are John Densmore and Robbie Krieger, drummer and guitar player of the Doors. Is that weird? So I went up to John and I said, listen, I hear you're a drummer. He said, yeah. I said, I'm putting a rock and roll band together. I got this buddy of mine, man. He's just a great writer, and we got some great material. I mean, I want to do poetry and rock and roll, you know, like poetry and jazz, you know. And I want to have it kind of like a jazz-based thing. He said, jazz? He said, are you into Coltrane? I said, Coltrane, man, I love Coltrane. He said, Elvin Jones is my idol. And he said, what about Miles? I said, Miles, you know, I'm Bill Evans, you know. He said, man, Philly Joe, huh? Ding, dun, dum, crack, ding, dun, dum. Yeah, I love Philly Joe. And I said, well, God, I mean, this is going to work out great. I mean, here's a guy who knows his jazz, man. But we're going to do rock and roll. He said, cool. He said, you know, I mean, I'm not good enough to be a real jazz drummer. I said, well, hell, I'm not good enough to be a real jazz piano player. I just love the stuff. If we could incorporate that into rock and roll, I said, you know, no one's doing that, man. My buddy Jim has got these great lyrics, man. They're very poetic, and we could do all kinds of stuff around it. He said, that sounds great. Let's get together. I said, yeah, we got to get a guitar player too, though. And he points over at Robbie. He said, well, see that guy, man? He's a guitar player. I said, what? Jim and I had worked out a bunch of songs, and Rick and the Ravens, not a bunch, but enough. Rick and the Ravens were sort of the backup band for the Doors. Now, we kind of plugged John Densmore into that, and we're working on some songs with my two brothers and one of their bass player buddies, and just working out some songs together. And then that started to fall apart. And we had our three single, Rick and the Ravens had their 3 single thing. Rick and the Ravens were falling apart. And we said to Dick Bach, listen, can we, I'm putting a new band together here. It's called The Doors. Can we do a demo session? And he said, well, you know, I owe you one more record. And why don't you, instead of making that record, why don't you just go ahead, use the studio time, and go ahead and make a demo? And I said, well, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Perfect. He said, because, you know, I'm not going to release the record. I mean, your band is falling apart and everything. Okay, fine. That's fine. So we go into the recording studio. The bass player quits, you know, and it was like my two brothers were the last ones left. Densmore is playing drums. My brother Rick's playing guitar. My brother Jim's playing mouth harp. Real nice, real sweet mouth harp. Harmonica. We proceeded to play 6 songs, and among those songs were the very first song we played, Moonlight Drive, and A Little Game was on there, Hello, I Love You was on there, and Summer's Almost Gone, and 1 or 2 others. And that is our official Doors demo that we walked the streets with. Unable to get a record deal from anybody with the demo. It didn't work out in the least, you know. So at the time, we're walking the streets with the demo. Rick and the Ravens have broken up, and my brothers have gone their separate ways, and then that whole thing fell apart. You know, there we are, John, Ray, and Jim, and Dorothy, and we don't have a guitar player. So we walked the streets with this demo, and we're going from record company to record company, and of course getting nowhere with it. Where, you know, you don't just walk in off the street with an acetate, but we thought it was so good that someone would definitely pick up on it eventually. So we went to see somebody at Liberty Records, and I was there alone with this guy, and he had a hit song, had either produced or something, some kind of vaguely outer space, outer limits kind of song, something like that. Had a pretty good instrumental hit with it. So we went in to see him, and I thought, well, here's our music. Check this out. And he listened to a few of the cuts, and he said, nah, you know, I don't really like it. I said, well, wait. The last song, check the last one, because it's kind of like the song that you did, you know, that outer space thing. It's called A Little Game, because it starts with a tink, 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 and he starts listening to it, and it just goes tink, tink, tink. Once I had a little game. I like to crawl back in my brain. Tink, tink, tink. I think you know the game I mean the game called Go Insane. And the guy heard the word Go Insane with the tink. Then the band comes in, tinky, 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 tinky. And he said, this isn't anything like my outer space song. This is not, this is sick. This is sick. This is ridiculous. Get out of here. Just get out of here. Don't you dare be comparing what you're doing to what I'm doing. And virtually threw me out of the office at Liberty Records. I said, okay. You don't have to get mad, man. I thought you might like it. It was a bunch of companies. We went to every company in Los Angeles. I mean, we walked into RCA. We walked into a Capitol. We walked into the Great Tower and all these gold records. And there's the four of us, man, in Hollywood from out of Venice. And we're in Hollywood. And we walk up to the front desk and say, "Hi, we're a rock and roll band. We're called The Doors." And, I was going to put my arm around him. "This is Jim Morrison. He's going to be a legend someday." And we looked at the girl and said, "Do you have anybody that listens to demos? Who should we see in the A&R department?" And the girl just looked up at us and said, "We don't have anybody here for you guys to listen to. There's nobody that wants to listen to your music. We don't take unsolicited demos. Sorry. Have a nice day." And she put her head back down and went back to it. And we just looked at the gold records and went, oh. Not getting anywhere with the demo, and Rick and the Ravens breaking up, my brother's moving on. We needed a guitar player, and John Densmore said, "Wait, let's get Robbie Krieger. That guy I introduced you to at the meditation, man. Let's get him down to play." And we said, "Okay, that sounds good. Let's give it a try, man." So in comes Robbie Krieger. We go over to Hank Olguin's house. He lived behind the bus station in Santa Monica, the famous little house that's no longer there behind the Santa Monica bus station. And Hank was an actor in one of my UCLA student movies in Evergreen. He's the guy in the shower with Dorothy. And Hank said, "Sure, man, you can use my place anytime you want." He had a piano there, and it was closed. We couldn't do it at UCLA because the rooms were too small at UCLA. So at Hank's house, there was a piano in the living room. I said, "Okay, let's do it." And so we brought over a little amplifier with a mic for Jim. John brought his drums over. Robbie came by with a guitar and a little amplifier, plugged that in, opened his guitar case up, took the guitar out, and then he opened that little thing in the neck, that little compartment in the neck, and he brings out this broken bottleneck. And I looked at it and said, "Jesus Christ, what the hell is that, man? What is that? Is that for self-defense?" He said, "No, man," because it was a jagged neck of a bottle. And it was perfect size. You could hold it in your hand and poke somebody's eyes out or slash their cheek with it. I said, "You live in a rough neighborhood?" He said, "I live in Pacific Palisades." I said, "Well, what is this bottleneck for, man?" He said, "Watch this." And he puts it on his finger and he goes, "Bow." And I said, "Oh my God." Morrison heard the sound and started to elevate. I swear Morrison moved about 2 inches off the ground, very imperceptibly, but Robbie Krieger playing that bottleneck on that low E string sounded like Ravi Shankar doing a very, very slow section of the opening section of a raga. And I said, "Wow, that's incredible." He says, "Yeah, it's a bottleneck, man. It's for playing the blues." I said, "Whoa," and he went, "Oh God, it's Muddy Waters, man, it's incredible." So I said, "Okay, listen, let's get started. Let's play a song." Jim said, I love that sound, man. I love that sound. That sounds incredible. Just play that, man. Play that." And I said, "What song should we do?" Jim said, "Let's do Moonlight Drive." I said, "Okay." I showed Robbie the chord change. It's very simple, Moonlight Drive, and a bluesy thing. And Jim said, play that. Use that bottleneck. Play the bottleneck on Moonlight Drive, man. That's a cool sound. Lit up a joint, smoked the joint, passed it around. The Doors entered the communal psychedelic state. And we began to play the song. John knew the song, so we began to play it. He counted off 1, 2, 3, 4, chung, 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 ka-ching. It was kind of funky at the time, a little different from the recorded version that came around. It's had a funk to it, and it was kind of like vaguely a James Brown or a funk song. And I'm playing dun chinka dun ka dinka dun. And Robbie comes in, bow, and Morrison starts to sing, let's swim to the moon. Let's climb through the tide. And man, we hit a groove that just was too cool. I couldn't believe it. I had a transcendental experience right then and right there. Just the four of us in that room. Nobody else was there. And the whole thing just elevated up to a level that after it was over with, I said to the guys, I've played music all my life, man. I've been playing since I've been 7, 8 years old. I played with a lot of bands and a lot of musicians, but I have never played music until this moment. And we finally get to Columbia Records and dropped it off at Columbia Records, and they said, yeah, we've got somebody in A&R that listens to stuff coming in off the street, and just leave your telephone number. And a couple of days later, Jim gets a call. He wrote his number on the on the demo, on the jacket of the demo. Jim gets a call from a guy at Columbia Records named Billy James, actually from Billy James' secretary. Billy James' secretary says, Billy would like to see you. Billy James, Mr. James would like to meet with you boys. Would you come down? Can you come down, tomorrow at 3 o'clock? We say, yeah, we can be there. And Jim comes over and tells me we've got an appointment tomorrow at Columbia Records at 3 o'clock. Bam, the next day we're there. Just Jim and I. The two of us went in, and in walks Billy James. They bring us into the office. We sit down. Billy was out. In walks Billy James into his office. I took one look at him and just giggled, man. Because Billy was ahead. You could look right into his eyes and you could see he's hip. He knows what's going on. Billy is a stoner. All right, man. And he's called us into his office, into the inner sanctum, the sanctum sanctorum. And we're there. And then, Billy looks at me and says, what's the matter? And Jim said, nothing, man. He's just kind of excited. He's happy. He's happy to see you. And Billy says, well, that's cool, because, I'm happy to see you guys too. Yeah, all right, man. So we're in his office, and he said, hey, I like your stuff, man. It's a little raw, needs some work on it. And then we say, hey, we got a guitar player. We got a great bottleneck guitar player. He said, well, that's fabulous. He said, that's great, because we want to sign you guys. I said, whoa, deal. Let's do it, man. And he said, okay. He said, is there anything, I'll get the paperwork together. And he said, listen, is there anything you need? We said, what do you mean? Yeah, we need, we could use some money. He said, well, I can't give you any money, but I'll tell you what I can do. We've just bought Vox. Vox musical instruments are now a part of Columbia. I can get you some free equipment if you want. I said, you're kidding. He said, yeah, why don't you drive out there, out to the valley? It's out in the valley, and just go out there and see what you want and pick it out, and just tell them, you're the Doors and you're signed to Columbia Records now, and tell those guys to give you anything you want, within reason. I mean, don't go out there and try to get 1,000 pieces of equipment, but if you need something, go get it. Solid, man. Great. Let's go do it. A couple of days later, we drive out, all four of us jump into John Densmore's van and drive on out. Robbie's complaining all the way. Yeah, Vox, man, Vox. I said, what are you talking about, man? Brian Jones plays that Vox teardrop-shaped guitar. He said, that guitar is no good. I've seen that guitar. I said, well, how about the amps? They got good amps, everybody uses those Vox amps. He said, well, let's go and check them out. I don't know about that. So we get out to the Vox place, and they take us into the showroom where all the stuff is set up, and they say, okay, well, you boys take a look at what you want. And there it is for me, the Vox organ, the Vox Continental. It's that red and black organ with the Z chrome on the legs, 2 Z chrome legs. And I have seen every English band that was using an organ was playing a Vox Continental organ. Black and white keys are reversed. And I said, I want that. I need that. That I must have. Pre-deal, John Densmore was terrific. He was a prince, man. He was, he was volatile, but then he's a drummer, and he's supposed to be volatile. You know, he had a short fuse, and would certainly never get angry at anybody in the band. That's what was great about the Doors. Nobody got angry at the Doors. I mean, we never got angry at each other. You know, there were never fights within the band. No matter how crazy Jim got in his later years, we'd come into rehearsal, man, and it was Jim again. It was the four of us working on songs. There was always a tranquility and always a purpose to being in a rehearsal room. Being in a rehearsal room was, the whole point of it was to make the best possible music you could make. See, here's the way it works with the Doors. There are 4 guys in the band. Each person is as essential as anybody else in the band. The drums are as important as the words. The words are as important as the guitar. The guitar is as important as the keyboard bass guy. Each thing contributed its 25%. People have said to me, well, Jim did everything. Well, you know, how could Jim possibly do everything? Jim wrote words and was the singer. Jim couldn't play an instrument. Jim didn't play. You know, you hear Doors music. That's not Jim's music. That's Ray Manzarek, John Densmore, and Robbie Krieger. That's Jim singing. And most of the times, those are Jim's words. When you hear John Coltrane playing a saxophone, he didn't show McCoy Tyner how to play the piano. He didn't tell Elvin Jones how to play the drums, you know. Those are each guy. Jimmy Garrison plays those bass lines, man. That's John Coltrane is not showing Jimmy Garrison how to play bass, Elvin Jones how to play drums. It's the same thing with the Doors, you know. Jim didn't tell anybody how to play their instrument. Jim never suggested to me play an A minor there, you know. And Jim didn't say, you know, Ray, an E minor ninth would sound good in Riders on the Storm. Nothing was ever said. You know, we each had our area of expertise. That was 1/4 of the pie. You remove any one of those quarters and you don't have anything. You know, the only reason people think Jim did everything is because Jim's so incredibly charismatic. You know, he's exactly what a lead singer is supposed to be. He's charismatic and he's handsome and dressed like a black mamba, and was an absolutely fabulous guy, and he would jump around on stage. He was a great leaper and a shaman on stage. So naturally, Jim got all the attention, and people would think that this is Jim Morrison's music. Well, in fact, it's the Doors' music, and Jim would be the first one to tell you that. As a matter of fact, we were introduced at a huge concert somewhere. The DJ that was doing the announcing came out on stage, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Morrison and the Doors." And the guy came off the stage. People are screaming. The guy comes off the stage, and Jim Morrison grabs this DJ and says, "Hey, man, go introduce us the right way." And he said, I just did. He said, "No, you didn't." He said, what are you talking about?" I said, "Jim Morrison and the Doors." Jim said to him, "That's not the name of this band. Do you know what the name of the band is?" He said, "Well, it's the Doors." Jim said to him, "Well, go back up there and say, 'Ladies and gentlemen, the Doors,' you jerk." The guy went back up on stage and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, here they are, the Doors." Audience screams, and out we came. So for Jim and for John and for Ray and for Robbie, it was the Doors, man. It was a magic circle. You did not break that magic circle. You did not alter that magic circle by this superimposition of any ego. See, this is not an ego game with the Doors. The whole point of this is not to be involved in your own personal ego, but to get into the higher ego, the higher state of consciousness that art permeates. Art is a higher state of consciousness. That's what we were we're trying to do to attain a non-egotistical artistic state in which we would give up being Jim Morrison, Ray Manzarek, John Densmore, and Robbie Krieger, and enter into that magic circle, into that circle of the Grail, you know, the Knights of the Round Table. And man, I got to tell you, it's a beautiful place to live. We can all do it. We can all do it on this planet. This is what the hippies are all about. This is what the 60s are all about. We can all do it on this planet if we want to. We can attain a magical state of grace and turn this planet into a virtual Garden of Eden if we want to, if we have the courage. If we have the courage and if we have the guts to leap up into that free place, to leap beyond all of those confines and dictates of the prevailing myth that we live by, and to create a new myth for ourselves, the myth of the 21st century. That's what we have to do. You know what's interesting is that there I am playing a Vox Continental organ and a Fender Rhodes piano bass, and obviously there's no bass player on the stage. There's four guys. One guy is singing, the other guy's playing a guitar, there's a drummer and a guy playing keyboards. You'd look at the band, you'd say, where's the bass player? They don't have a bass player, and yet you heard down there something going boom, 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 repeating lines over and over. My God, there's a sound of a bass. That's what was great about the Fender Rhodes keyboard bass. It sounded just like a bass. We put it through a Fender Bassman amplifier, and that was our bass player. And not one person ever came up to me and said, you guys need a bass player. How come you don't have a bass player? The entire career of the Doors, no one ever said to me, get a bass player. That never happened. However, Owsley did come up to us, Augustus Stanley Owsley, the king of acid in San Francisco, the guy who was like a manufacturer of LSD. And we were playing at the Fillmore Auditorium. Owsley comes up to me after the set, and he's just kind of blazing. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you guys are great, but you got to get a rhythm guitar player, man. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you got to get a rhythm guitar player. I said, a rhythm guitar player? I expecting, you know, get a bass player. You got to get a rhythm guitar player. Why do I have to get a rhythm guitar player? Why do we need a rhythm guitar player? He said, the holes, man, the holes. Somebody's got to fill those holes. You guys have got too many holes in your music. And I said, Stanley, that's where the void shines through. And he went, oh, just kind of turned around and ran off. And I never saw the man ever again or ever talked to him ever again. And now we could play some gigs because we had a guitarist with the bottleneck guitar. Robbie had an extra guitar that he could tune to open tuning. He said, you know, I could have one guitar tuned one way and one guitar tuned the other way. That way I don't have to keep, yeah, that's what I'll do. So he took the extra guitar. We had amplifiers, we had drums, we had a lead singer, we had a contract with Columbia Records, and we were on our way, man. We were on our way. Of course, it never quite happened the way it was supposed to. There's a 6-month period in which we were going to be recording our first single. They assigned a producer to us, a guy named Larry Marks, who was actually a very good producer, and never met him. No, actually, we did meet him. We met him once in Billy's office, and he said, hi, I'm your producer, and okay, man, that's cool. When will we get started? He said, well, I'll call you. And about 3 or 4 months went by. We didn't hear anything from anybody. And Densmore was over at Billy's office. We were all over at Billy's office saying, hey, what's going on? And well, I don't know. It's not my job. I'm just the A&R. I just put the people together. You'll have to talk to Marks, man. It's not up to me. And Billy said, there's nothing I can do about it. John happened to be looking over at Billy's desk and sees a pickup list and a drop list. On the pickup list are a bunch of local bands and bands from around the country. Nobody's ever heard of them. Nobody ever did or ever will. And he's looking down the drop list, and there at number 6 on the drop list, it says The Doors. And we walk out the door after the meeting, and John says, hey, we're on the drop list, man. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I was sneaking a peek on Billy's desk. They're going to drop us. We said, well, to hell with them, man. Let's get out of the contract. We went back into the office and said, hey, Billy, we want out of the contract, man. If they're not going to record us tomorrow, just let us go. He said, wait a minute, why don't you wait a couple more months? You know, you got 2 more months to go on your contract. They'll pay you $1,000 if they're going to drop you. And we said, forget it, man. Just forget it. Just give us our release. Just let us sign a piece of paper. We're out of here. I've got my box organ. What do I care, man? We're out of here. We're gone. We're off to the next record company. We're going to go play some gigs, you know? I mean, I didn't say this to him, but that's what I thought to myself. Hey, we're going to go play some gigs and work around town. We're going to get signed by somebody. Somebody will want to get us. And the rest is history. When the Doors first went into the recording studio, we knew nothing about the recording studio. I had done a couple of things, a little bit of work with Rick and the Ravens, and Dick Bach showed us a few things, and, how you mix. I was aware of how you make a mix, but as far as the technical workings of a studio, that was completely beyond me. So lo and behold, Jack Holtzman, the president of Elektra Records, who signed us, one day introduced us outside of the Whiskey A Go-Go, introduced us. He said, boys, I'd like you to meet your producer, Paul Rothchild. And here comes this hip dude from New York City, out of the folk scene, not out of the jazz scene, but out of the village, the Greenwich Village folk scene. And, man, I took one look at him and said, this is one of the hippest dudes I've ever seen. This guy has a brain in that head of his. He is one smart cookie. Paul starts to talk a mile a minute. He's just going to town, man. He is full of excitement, full of energy. He's about 5 years older than I am. Great. Someone that I can look up to, and a little bit more of an authority figure. I don't have to be the authority figure all the time. I'm 4 or 5 years older than the rest of guys in the band. Frankly, I'm tired of being the authority figure. Paul, you're the authority figure in the recording studio. This is going to be absolutely great. He was definitely hip. He knew all kinds of things. Very literate. Jim and Paul hit it off immediately. Paul was very literate. I hit it off with Paul from a musical perspective. We just had a great relationship all the way through the whole thing. And we met Bruce and thought he was just super, man. The man was so technically astute and a very funny guy and a very sweet human being. So Botnick and Rothschild, they were the 6 doors. There were 4 doors in the recording studio and 2 doors in the control room. The relationship between the 6 of us was absolutely magnificent. Paul was running the whole show. Botnick was doing the sound. Paul was helping him with the sound, judging the sound, and being the liaison between the musical creativity and expertise of the band and the technical expertise of Bruce Botnick, and he was the man who would go in between those 2 entities, those really non-compatible entities. But Paul Rothschild was able to bridge that gap just beautifully. And he was so creative and such a pleasure to work with in the recording studio. At the time of the Morrison Hotel album, we're in the middle of playing the blues and doing Morrison Hotel. We take a break, and Jim goes off and gets a little dinner by himself with a friend. And we had a quick dinner and stayed in the recording studio working on some tunings and some little variations and chord changes and whatnot. Paul Rothschild's got a nice little bunch of pot on the console. He's got he had 2 grades of pot that he would bring to the recording studio, WD and KD. WD was work dope, which was just kind of, you could get high, get a little buzz going, nothing serious, so that you could play. And then KD was killer dope. That was for after the session. That was when you gave it the pot test to see, okay, we've got 5 takes of the song. Let's have a little KD, sit back, relax, listen to it, and see which one's got the groove. So he's got a little WD out right after dinner. Jim walks in with one of his friends. I forget who it was. And the chief of police of the city of Los Angeles, and Lawrence Harvey. And he said, I met these 2 guys we were having something to eat over at the Garden District, and here's Tom Redden and Lawrence Harvey. Rothschild hits the ceiling, comes back down, and very coolly takes this entire bunch of pot that he had on the console and starts sweeping it into an open door and going and blowing all of the little grass off. And for the rest of the evening, man, Tom Redden and Lawrence Harvey sat in the control room, right, breathing on Rothschild's neck while we're out there doing Roadhouse Blues. Thanks, Jim. Bring the chief of police in. You have to understand that Dorothy Fujikawa was totally supportive of the whole thing because we were lovers. Dorothy and I met at UCLA. We never intended to be rich or famous. She was not involved in the rock and roll scene. She was an art student at UCLA. I was in an art class at UCLA learning how to draw storyboards is what I was going to do. I was going to draw a storyboard. That's why I was taking this art class. And I found I had no talent that way, could not do it at all. I wanted to be like Eisenstein and draw the storyboards. Didn't work out in the least. I couldn't draw anything. However, sitting on the other end of the class by a window, the window was open and it was the fall semester, it was warm, the window was open, is this lovely Japanese chick. And I said, my God, she is just so beautiful. Little by little, we got to talking and became lovers, man. And we were going to be artists. We were going to go to New York City if we didn't make it in Los Angeles, and I would have been more than happy just to do documentary films in New York and work on documentaries. Get a little place in Brooklyn Heights, looking back over across the river. And we never intended to be rich or famous or anything. We just intended to be boyfriend and girlfriend and live the life of artists, starving, struggling artists. So she was always there. It was one of my artistic pursuits, called a rock and roll band. She thought, this is a good idea. And she thought Jim was terrific. You know, she thought the songs were terrific. So she was always there, totally supportive, totally backing. And as a matter of fact, Dorothy Fujikawa worked while Ray Manzarek and Jim Morrison were at UCLA working out those songs in the music room at UCLA. Dorothy was supporting us. She was the one who had a job. She was the only person who had a job between the 3 of us. The money she brought home supported for, God, a good 3-4 months there. The money she brought home supported Manzarek, Morrison, and Fujikawa. Dorothy is actually the one who had the record for Brecht and Weill. She was into German 30s music, and Duke Ellington music is what she was into. She knew a little bit about jazz, and, you know, she liked Charlie Mingus a little bit. And the Brecht and Weill song that the Doors did is called The Whiskey Bar, or the Alabama song as it's actually called, and it comes from an opera written by Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht, who are German composers. It was approximately 1928-1930 Germany, the rise and fall of the city of Mahagoni, and it's a story of Western decadence, and there's a song in there called The Whiskey Bar, as we called it, the Alabama song, and Lottie Lenya, sung by a woman, Show Me the Way to the Next Whiskey Bar. So that was actually Dorothy's record, and she's the one who played it for us, played it for me and for Jim. And at some point or another, because we had that record around the house, Dorothy said, you know what, why don't you guys do kind of a rock version of The Whiskey Bar? And we kind of looked at her and said, hey, you know what? That's a crazy idea, but that's a good idea. So we worked out the chord changes, man, and got down on it. Brecht and Weill, 1928, 1930, Germany enters into Southern California, Venice, 1966, 1967. Dorothy and I had been living together since 63, 64. We got married in 1967 on December 21st, 1967. And Jim Morrison was our best man. Pamela, his girlfriend, was the bridesmaid, the maid of honor. And the four of us went downtown to City Hall and got married along with 75 other couples who, one by one, would, waiting in a big holding bullpen, one by one, we would come into the judge's chambers, and like in a 2-minute ceremony, he would marry you, and out you'd go, and here comes the next one. And this holding pen had 75 or so couples in it, 50 Chicano couples, 24 black couples, and the other couple was these four hippies, you know, the interracial hippies with the other two people. So we get married at City Hall. It was a quick, simple little, do you take this man to be your, yes, you take this woman to be your lawful unit? I do. We got is there, how many rings? A 1-ring ceremony. You may put the ring on the bride's finger, and I got this huge snake ring at Woolworth's. A coiled snake with a great big red ruby on its head. It was like a garish, ridiculous kind of, I don't know what, you know, El Chicano Grande kind of ring down on, you know, on Broadway. Put this ring on her finger, and she's holding her, and Morrison breaks out laughing right in the judge's chambers. He was stifling, holding his hand up in his mouth, stifling the biggest roar I've ever heard come out of him. And the judge didn't bat an eyelash, saw the ring go on. Next! In came the next couple. Jim and I and Dorothy and Pam go off to Olvera Street. We have a luncheon. It was about 12:30, 1 o'clock by the time we got to Olvera Street. Had margaritas and enchiladas on Olvera Street, and that was our wedding ceremony, just the four of us. And Dorothy and I are still married to this very day. And then the next night, or that night or the next night, was our honeymoon. And our honeymoon was a performance at the Shrine Auditorium with the Grateful Dead. A big psychedelic light show hippie fest at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. The Grateful Dead played, and then out came the Doors. And Jim said, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Ray and Dorothy, the married couple. Would you give a big round of applause, please, for Ray Manzarek and Dorothy Fujikawa, who are now Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Daniel Manzarek. And the whole place broke up in a big applause. And Dorothy was off to the side of the stage, blushing, of course. And I said, come here, honey, step out on stage with me. And we took a little bow, and she ran off. I think it was the only time Dorothy's ever been on stage, and just blushed, totally embarrassed, and played with the Grateful Dead, man. And Jim and Pam, God bless them, you know, they're both gone. They're both on the other side. They've broken on through to some other realm, into the higher realm. They are now energy in the sun. They are in the ether. Romeo and Juliet are united forever in that romantic place that we're all going to go to someday. Well, at the time, in the middle of the psychedelic era, the whole thing was to be yourself and to do your own thing. That was, you did your own thing, and nobody got in your space, and you didn't get into anybody else's space. I guess that's why people were able to get along. That's why this whole idea of peace and love and brotherhood and harmony all happened, because you were allowed to do your own thing, quote unquote. I wouldn't judge you. You wouldn't judge me. I'm not going to judge what you wear. Morrison said I want to put on leather pants. I thought to myself, this is totally insane. Why would a man want to enclose the entire lower half of his body in leather? Why would he want to have leather over his penis? Wait a minute. come to think of it, I think I understand now. Oh, I get it. Is that why? All right. So anyway, I thought it was ridiculous that Jim wanted to wear leather. And he said, I want to wear leather pants. I said, why, man? And he said, like Marlon Brando and The Fugitive Kind. I said, oh, I gotcha. Like Marlon Brando's snakeskin jacket. He said, exactly, man. He said, I can't afford a snakeskin jacket, but we can afford a pair of leather pants. And I said, okay. He said, where can I get them? I said, God, at a cowboy store. I don't know where you get leather pants, Jim. I said, but let me look around. I'll tell you what, let me look around. And I thought, okay, I'm going to find Jim some leather pants, man. So it was like my job. In Beverly Hills is a leather shop, a man called Mark Hart. Mark Hart was on Little Santa Monica Boulevard, and he was an old European tailor, a man from Germany, and he made leather jackets, leather suits, leather coats, leather sport coats, and leather pants in a European style, and a decidedly baggy sort of German, post-World War II, certainly not Nazi or anything, but just kind of in a lame European style. And I went into the shop and I said, can you make leather pants? He said, of course I can make leather pants. That's what I do here. I said, show me some leather. He said, this is glove leather. Look at this. This is kid glove leather. And I looked at this leather, and it was the softest leather I'd ever felt. And I said, I'm going to be back in a little while with my friend. And I said, Jim, I found it, man. Come on. This is it. This is the shop. Mark Hart. So Jim, Dorothy Fujikawa, Ray Manzarek go off to Mark Hart, walk into the shop, and I said, feel this leather, man. And I said, listen, bring out that kid glove leather. And I said, Jim, look at this, man. Jim felt the leather, and he said, this is perfect. This is it, man. This is this soft. That's what I want. I said, I thought you wanted some kind of like stiff kind of leather, like cow. He said, I don't want cowhide, man. I want this kid glove leather. That's what I want. And I turned to Mark Hart, and I said, can you make a pair of pants out of this? He said, that is for gloves. You do not make pants. Why do you think it's called glove leather? This kid glove leather. That's for gloves. You cannot make pants out of that. And Jim said, can't you make me a pair of pants? He said, well, I can. I've never done it. I can do it. I can work anything in leather. Well, how do you want them cut? Let me take your measurements. What kind of cut do you like? You like this with a double pleat, and you like a lot of room? And Jim said, no. Cut them like jeans. Cut my pants like Levi's. And Mark Hart went, what? You want this finest leather cut like Levi's, like a cowboy pants? What is the matter with you? And Jim said, that's what I want. And I said, hey, that's what he wants. We're paying for it. Mark Hart said, all right, I will do it. Come back in 2 weeks. Took Jim's measurements, man, and sure enough, in 2 weeks we came back, and they were super. They just fit. They were like snake skin. They was like, he looked like a snake, man. He looked like a black mamba. He put on those leather pants, and from the waist down, he had turned into a black mamba, and that was the beginning of of Jim Morrison, sex symbol, Jim Morrison, sex idol on stage, when he became the black mamba. That was it, man. It was all over. All the women who saw him just absolutely fell in love. Well, here's what happened as far as our uniforms, our band uniforms were concerned. Jim obviously was going to wear those leather things and wore a poet's shirt on the top. It was a perfect combination. He wore a loose-fitting kind of Russian collar poet's shirt with large sleeves and plenty of room, a kind of a billowy quality to them. And then he wore these hip-hugging, tight black leather jeans with an American Indian concho belt. That along with your boots. Everyone wore boots at the time. I was more inclined towards the Zeidler and Zeidler Jazz Cat, DeVos, that kind of look. Basically, the look that I wanted to affect on stage was Miles Davis in a Continental suit. That's how I wanted to look. I wanted to look like Miles because Miles was, this is a couple of years earlier, that period of 1958 to 1964, just before the Beatles came over. Jazz was king, and Miles Davis was the king of cool. He was the absolute coolest dude on the planet. He had the best looking clothes, just cut so beautifully, so nicely, so casual, and yet so elegant at the same time. And he had this Ferrari, and he had this great looking, his wife Fran was absolutely gorgeous, and he had a 5-story brownstone in New York, and he played the coolest jazz, and he played with Bill Evans and Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane, and that Miles Davis album, Kind of Blue, was just an absolute killer, and the man who played that music and was in charge of it was just the coolest dressing guy on the planet. That's how I wanted to look. That's how I wanted to be. That's how I wanted to live. That was what I wanted. A New York penthouse apartment, a little brownstone, something like that. Something small and something elegant and something very, very choice. So Dorothy and I, that's how we try to live our lives. I mean, we still do, for that matter. I don't have a mansion. I don't have an estate. I don't have a gate. We've got a small house, very tastily furnished, and I always like to think I'm overlooking Central Park somewhere. I'm in New York City. I mean, we live in California, but I'm in New York City overlooking Central Park, a little bit of art on the walls, and, put on some Issey Miyake and Comme des Garçons. I'm fine, man. John and Robbie were more into, because they were into Maharishi's meditation and really took to it hook, line, and sinker, were kind of into an Indian flower child sort of motif. So their outfits were handmade by some of the local flower girls of Los Angeles. So they were definitely wearing, and Jim was wearing hand tailored things too by Mark Hart, and the girls were making more Maharishi inspired flower child garments for John and Robbie. So he had the guy in the suits. I was always wearing suits. I didn't wear ties. Although I did on the first album, I wore a tie. Well, Miles had a tie on all the time, Train, and I mean, all the guys, all the jazz cats were completely dressed. They all had ties on. Coltrane is playing his brains out. He's elevating into the fifth dimension, and he's wearing a coat and tie. And Elvin Jones is the absolute volcano of the universe, who is creating, the man is creating the universe on his drums, and he's wearing a coat and tie. So, I didn't see a coat and tie and passion being mutually exclusive. So for me, I could be as passionate as I could possibly be on the keyboards and still wear a coat and tie. That had nothing to do with it. But for the most part, I didn't wear a tie. It was kind of restricting. Anyway, I would wear suits and sport coats and, try to shave and keep my hair combed. Jim's wearing black leather and poet shirts, and John and Robbie are flower children. And basically that's Los Angeles. That's the blend and the brew of Los Angeles, You've got the Wild West as the lead singer up front, the shaman, the Black Mamba, the Snake Man up front, the Lizard King is the lead singer. You got a couple of local boys who are meditators and flower children. And then you've got the guy from, the New York Brownstone, who's been influenced by beatniks and Evergreen Review and the Jazzers. And that's the Doors, man. A tour for the Doors was 5 nights. We were never going to go out and do a 60-city tour. What is the point of that? This is all, who wants to go out and play a 60-city tour? That is so predictable, so mundane, and so boring that you as a musician, by the time you've gotten to the 35th city, all you're doing is going by rote. No improvisation, no fooling around, no intensity. Everything's got to be done exactly the same way every night to go along with the light show. Because you've got the lights on cue. The lights are all computerized. Well, you better play your show according to those computerized lights. I'm going to play the lights? No, 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 no. The light man works his show to me. We would go into a town and they would say, what kind of lights do you have? Well, we don't have lights. Don't you guys have lights in the auditorium? Yeah, well, we got lights. Okay. Well, if a song is going fast, make the lights brighter. If it's a slow song, make them kind of darker. And you got a spotlight man? Yeah, well, follow Jim Morrison. He's the lead singer. When he's not singing, the guitar player is playing, move the spot over to him. Those were our lighting instructions. You don't have to do anything with lights. It's a psychic hypnotic thing that, man, I don't care if there were lights in the place or no lights or nothing. It didn't matter. Is there sound? Jim at the microphones, Robbie on his guitar, John's on his drums, Ray's on his organ. Is there an audience out there? We'll work the magic. We improvised all the time. That was the whole point of it. The Doors were essentially like a blues band, jazz band. What you had in a jazz band, you have your basic song structure, and then you have a whole free blowing section. No one knows what anybody's going to do. You're going to be working off of a basic foundation, but anybody is free to go anywhere they want, and at the end of everybody's solo, you come back, restate the song, and that's the end of the song. The Doors did exactly the same thing. We would have, when the music's over, could go anywhere, man. The song starts the way it starts. It's a song in E minor. It's going to be a long improvisation, and there's going to be a long section in the middle in which Jim can do whatever he wants. I can play whatever I want. It kept it always fresh for us, always exciting. And since we didn't play a lot of gigs, we were completely charged, completely wired. We had so much energy that you'd go into a place and you would just blast, man. You would just go like John Cleland Holmes, like Jack Kerouac screaming at Allen Ginsberg when Ginsberg first read Howl. He was screaming at him, "Go, man, go." John Cleland Holmes' novel is called Go. That's what the Doors did. We'd go into a town and we would go, and it would be hard and fast and hot and passionate and sensuous. That's what the music is all about. You'd play your 4 or 5 nights, man, and you'd be fried, you'd be burnt. We'd go home, we'd rest up, we'd go to the beach, we'd go to Venice, we'd go up to Laurel Canyon, we'd cool it, we'd goof a little bit. 3 weeks later, we'd go out and play some other section of the country. We'd go down to Texas. All right, cool, we're going to play Texas, man. Let's go get some barbecue and just burn them and smoke them down there. And that's the only way to do music. If you go out and play too many gigs and stay on the road too long, you're just going to become an automatic machine. The jazz guys can do it because they improvise. See, that's why they can get away with it. For them, it's a constant improvisation. So the future is always unknown. The future is unknown. You're always stepping into it. Every night you're stepping off reality into the void, and you're going to create a new reality. Man, so many of the rock bands go out today and have been for quite a while now, since the mid-70s. Those monster tours got started with the light shows. I feel sorry for those guys, man. Well, the live recordings of the Doors, people say they hold up real well. I suppose they do. That's not for me to judge because I was on the inside playing the stuff. But I got to tell you, man, that once again, we were all going balls out, improvisation. Let's see where it can take us. Sometimes you capture the magic, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you. You're getting to do this one time and one time only. You do it like it's your last time on planet Earth, man. You give it everything you have. And you know what? It's joyous. You don't burn yourself out. You don't blow yourself out. Instead, you get charged with energy. You get charged with the chi, as the Chinese say, the energy, the cycles of life and death and love and sex and energy of the planet, the energy of the sun. It just charges you. You can race through this kind of stuff and feel completely and totally alive. And we can all do it. The Doors did it, and we're still talking about the Doors. That's why I'm here talking to you now, because we all tapped into that energy. And man, everybody who's listening to this, you guys can do it too. All you got to do is open the doors of perception. All you have to do is open your heart and let that sun shine in. People say to me, why is your music still popular, Ray? Why is it still going on today? And the only thing that I can think of is that it represents a freedom to the bound and constricted age that we're now living in. It's an antidote to the constriction of the 90s. I feel that we're so bound up and constricted and afraid of each other and afraid to let ourselves open up to another human being that we're going to be laughed at, we're going to be mocked, we're going to be hurt, we're going to be exposed for the fools that we are. Well, guess what, folks? We're all fools. We're all weak. We are all pathetic little losers. That's what the Doors realized about each other and said, hey, you know what? Let's support each other. Let's make this community. Let's find this moment in time, this perfect Zen moment that we can transcend our fears, our ego, our time, our place, and enter this timeless state. It's the same place that everybody can enter. It's the human destiny. It's not a trick or something. It's not something that is only allowed for certain human beings. It's the point of being a human being. It's where we are going. It's where we have to go get to. Dare I say it? We are God. God is us. We are everything. God is everything. There is no death. There is only life, infinite life that goes on and on and on, and power and energy and passion. Let's grab that energy, man. Let's grab that power and work with it. And that's what we tried to do. That's what the Doors tried to do, and on stage and in the recording studio. Capture that power. Because we were all psychedelic. We were all heads. You know, the Doors are a bunch of acid heads, man. The Doors were called, quote unquote, the kings of acid rock. Well, that's what we were into. We were acid heads, you know. I don't know if we played acid rock. I think we played something a little different. I'm not sure what you'd categorize Doors music as. Perhaps it's a category in and of itself. But man, that state of enlightenment and that state of oneness that you enter into. And it says in the Bible, Jesus said, look how good it is for brethren to dwell together in harmony. And boy, at a Doors concert, that's what we did. The Doors and the audience, we dwelled together in a state of harmony, and it was sweet and it was good. Well, Jim's always around, you know, and it's not so much that you feel guided by Jim, it's that you feel that Jim's always in the room, you know. He has a tendency to come in, so, you know, his spirit is always there, and he's always a good friend, and, you know, he's not here to defend himself, man, so I'm going to take care of that dude, you know, because I love that guy. That guy was a damn good friend of mine, a damn good poet, a great entertainer, a shaman, a great human being, and I swear if that bottle hadn't gotten him, you know, if that booze hadn't gotten him, he'd be around today and we'd be screaming and jumping and scratching and hollering just like we were in 1967. Well, the Doors are going to now go down in certainly, you know, the history books for a while anyway. I don't know where the Doors will be 100 years from now, but I'd say for the next 50 years as part of American popular music of the second half of the 20th century, I think the Doors certainly have their place in that, you know, that arena of popular performers. And for me, rock and roll is, you know, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, and all those cats. And then the 60s come along, and it's the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and the Doors. And then it keeps on going into the 70s and the 80s, and now we're into the 90s. But I think the Doors are part of that classic mythology of the Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Bob Dylan, that thing that America was in the 60s. And I think that thing that America was is like Paris in the 20s. when I was in the 60s, I always looked back at Paris in the 20s, the Dadaists and the Surrealists and the artists after World War I, all the great art that was being produced in Paris and Berlin and in Russia too, with the Russian constructivists, Mayakovsky and the Rodchenko and all of those guys, and Brecht and Weil in Germany, and all of the great French artists, both the musicians and the painters and everything. We look back on that era from the 60s and said, gosh, I wish we were in Paris in the 20s. And I think what we created in the 60s is that same sort of thing to kids today. I've heard kids say to me, gosh, I wish I was there in the 60s with you guys. And I say to them, you know, that's the way I used to feel about the 20s, man. God, I wish I was there in the 20s. You see, any moment in time is yours. It belongs to you. All you have to have is the courage to step outside of the norm, step outside of the accepted way of doing things, and look back at that and say, this is right, this is not right. This is right for me, I'll do that, that's acceptable, that's right. The good is always right. The bad and the evil I must turn my back on. I must shun the evil. The darkness is good because that's where the secrets lie. So the kids today, you can all become like we were in the 60s. Man, all you have to do is do it. All you have to do is have the courage to do it and the courage to want to change the way things are. And I would highly advise we better change this society and turn America into what it is supposed to be, the land of the free. The free, first of all, the land of the free and the brave, because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now I'm going to go home and watch UCLA play basketball. They're still on. They're still playing in the playoffs. It's still tournament time, and I'm still watching them. Good night.